Now that your wife has died, mourn, pack your things, and never come back here again. That is exactly what my son-in-law whispered into my ear while the dirt was still falling onto my wife's casket. I did not cry. I did not beg him to let me stay in the home I had paid for. I simply looked at my daughter, waiting for her to defend me, and watched her turn her face away in shame. So I left. But I did not go home to pack my bags. I did not go to a homeless shelter. I hailed a taxi and went straight to the National Bank to withdraw $20,000 in cash. Because what my family did not know was that the old retired mechanic they just kicked to the curb was sitting on a fortune that could buy and sell them 10 times over. And I was about to make them pay for every single tear I shed that afternoon. Before I tell you how I destroyed their lives, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from. My name is Winston. I am 73 years old, and I am an African-American man who has seen enough of this world to know when to hold my tongue and when to strike. Yesterday should have been a day of quiet mourning. My beloved Beatrice, the woman who stood by my side for 45 years, had finally found her rest after a long battle with illness. The rain in Chicago was relentless that afternoon, a cold gray drizzle that soaked through the wool of my old black coat. I stood by the open grave, my hat in my hands, feeling an emptiness in my chest, so vast I thought it might swallow me whole. We had been a team, Beatrice and I. We had started with nothing in a small apartment on the South Side and built a life brick by brick. The pastor closed his Bible, his words about ashes and dust fading into the sound of the rain hitting the umbrellas. The few friends who had come to pay their respects began to drift away toward their cars, murmuring condolences that I barely heard. I just wanted to stand there a moment longer. I wanted to say one last goodbye to the only person who truly knew me. That was when I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting comfort. Instead, I saw the sneering face of Bryce, my son-in-law. Bryce is a tall white man with a smile that looks like it was bought from a catalog and eyes that measure the value of everything they see. He works in real estate, or at least that is what he tells people at parties. In reality, he is a man drowning in debt who thinks the world owes him a living. He leaned in close, invading my personal space, his expensive cologne clashing with the smell of wet earth. "The show is over, Winston." He whispered, his voice low so the remaining guests wouldn't hear. "Beatrice is gone, and with her goes the only reason I tolerated you living under my roof." I blinked, my mind slow to process his cruelty in such a sacred moment. "Excuse me," I said, my voice raspy from days of silence. "You heard me, old man," Bryce hissed, tightening his grip on my shoulder. "You have until sunset. Go to the house, pack your pathetic little boxes of junk, and get out. Tiana and I need our space. We are done playing nursemaid to a useless relic." I froze. The audacity was breathtaking. The house they lived in, the roof over their heads, was a home I had purchased 20 years ago. I had put it in my daughter's name because I wanted her to have security. I had trusted her. I looked past Bryce to Tiana, my daughter, the little girl I had carried on my shoulders, the woman I had walked down the aisle, the person I had supported through college and 2 failed businesses. She was standing a few feet away holding a black umbrella, staring intently at her shoes. "Tiana," I called out gently, "did you hear what your husband just said?" She didn't look up. She didn't move toward me. She just shifted her weight and mumbled, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Bryce is right, Dad. It is too much. We need to move on. You are getting older. It is a lot of pressure on us. We think a nursing home would be best for you. We found a state-funded one. It is cheap, but it is a roof." The betrayal hit me harder than the grief. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an erasure. They weren't just kicking me out. They were discarding me like a broken appliance that could no longer be fixed. They saw an old black man with calloused hands and a cheap suit, and they assumed I was helpless. They assumed I was nothing without them. Tiana knew I had a pension from my years as a mechanic, or so she thought. She knew I had Social Security, and she apparently decided that was enough for me to rot in a state facility while she and her husband lived in the house I bought. I looked at Bryce again. He was smirking, a look of triumph plastered on his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had finally cleared the obstacle that stood between him and total control of the property. He leaned in again. "And don't even think about taking anything valuable, Winston. I changed the locks an hour ago while you were in the hearse. If you try to take the silver or the vintage records, I will call the cops and report a burglary. You know who they will believe." My blood ran cold. He had planned this. While I was riding in the hearse with my dead wife, he was calling a locksmith to bar me from my own home. He was threatening me with the police, using the color of my skin as a weapon, knowing exactly how that dynamic plays out in this country. I looked at my daughter one last time. I waited for a spark of humanity, a tear, a protest. Nothing. She was weak. She had allowed this man to hollow her out until there was nothing left of the values her mother and I had taught her. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief didn't leave, but it was pushed aside by a cold, hard resolve. I straightened my spine. I put my hat back on my head. I looked Bryce dead in the eye. He expected me to beg. He expected me to cry, to plead, to ask where I would sleep. He wanted the satisfaction of seeing me broken. "Okay," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised even me. Bryce blinked, his smile faltering for a millisecond. What I said? "Okay," I repeated. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on Tiana, and I began to walk. "Wait!" Tiana called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Dad, where are you going? You need to get your clothes. We packed a bag for you. It is on the porch." I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking through the wet grass past the rows of headstones toward the cemetery gates. I left the bag. I left the clothes. I left the photographs, the furniture, the memories. If they wanted the house, they could have the house. They could have the ghosts that came with it. I walked out onto this main road, the rain soaking me to the bone, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt a fire lighting up in my belly. I raised my hand and hailed a yellow taxi that was splashing through the puddles. The driver, a man about my age with kind eyes, slowed down and peered at me through the window. He saw an old man in a wet funeral suit standing alone on a corner. He unlocked the door. "Rough day, brother?" he asked as I slid into the back seat. "You have no idea," I replied, wiping the water from my face. "Where to home?" I looked out the window at the gray sky. I thought about the empty house that was no longer mine. I thought about the cheap nursing home Tiana had mentioned. I reached into my inner coat pocket and felt the cold metal of a key I had kept on a chain around my neck for 40 years. A key Tiana didn't know existed. A key Bryce would never find. "No, not home," I said firmly. "Take me to the First National Bank downtown, the main branch." The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, confused. "It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Pop. They are about to close. And look at you. You are soaked. You sure you don't want to go get changed first?" "I am sure," I said. "Drive! I need to see the branch manager before he locks the doors." The driver shrugged and pulled into traffic. He probably thought I was senile. He probably thought I was confused by grief, an old man wandering in the rain trying to get $5 out of an account that was already overdrawn. That is what everyone thought. That is what Tiana thought. That is what Bryce thought. They saw a retired mechanic who fixed transmissions and changed oil. They saw a man who clipped coupons and complained about the price of milk. They didn't know who I really was. They didn't know that for 30 years I wasn't just a mechanic. I was a contractor for the city's underground infrastructure. I held patents on industrial valve systems that were used in every major city in the Midwest. I had invested every dime of those royalties into municipal bonds and land that nobody wanted until everybody wanted it. I lived simply because I wanted to teach my daughter the value of $1, and because Beatrice and I didn't need flashy cars to be happy. But the lesson was over. As the taxi sped toward the city skyline, I watched the raindrops race down the glass. Bryce thought he had kicked a stray dog out into the storm. He didn't realize he had just unleashed a wolf. I wasn't going to the bank to beg for a loan. I was going to open safety deposit box number 404. And what was inside that box was going to bring their entire world crashing down before the sun came up tomorrow. The automatic doors of the First National Bank slid open with a mechanical hum, and I stepped into the air-conditioned lobby, leaving a trail of rainwater on their pristine marble floor. The security guard, a young man who looked like he spent more time at the gym than reading books, immediately stepped into my path. His hand hovered near his belt, and his eyes scanned my soaked funeral suit, my muddy shoes, and the old fedora that was dripping onto my forehead. I knew exactly what he saw. He saw a vagrant. He saw a confused old black man who had wandered in from the storm looking for a handout or a place to sleep. "Sir, you cannot be in here," the guard said, his voice loud enough to make the few remaining customers turn and stare. "We are closing in 5 minutes and we have a dress code. I need you to leave immediately." I did not move. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the inner pocket of my wet jacket. The guard tensed up ready to grab me, but I pulled out a small leather wallet that was older than he was. I opened it and extracted a card. It was not a debit card. It was not a credit card. It was a heavy metal card with gold lettering that the bank had issued to its top-tier founding investors 30 years ago. I held it out between 2 fingers, my hands steady despite the chill in my bones. "Give this to Mr. Richardson," I said calmly. "Tell him Winston is here to access Box 404. The guard looked at the card, then at me with skepticism written all over his face. He snatched it from my hand, likely thinking it was stolen, and walked over to the teller station. I watched him whisper to the head teller. She glanced at the card, and her face went pale. She picked up the phone immediately. Less than a minute later, the door to the executive offices burst open. Mr. Richardson, the branch manager, came running out, adjusting his tie. He was a man who usually only moved fast for golf carts, but today he was sprinting. "Mr. Winston," he gasped, stopping in front of me and extending a hand that was shaking slightly. "I am so terribly sorry. I did not know it was you. Please come this way." Ignoring the stunned look of the security guard, Mr. Richardson led me past the velvet ropes and into the private viewing room reserved for their most exclusive clients. He left me alone with the metal box, offering me coffee and towels, which I refused. I sat down at the heavy oak table and stared at the steel container in front of me. Box 404. This box held the silence I had kept for 40 years. I inserted my key into the lock and turned it. The click echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. I lifted the lid. Inside there was no jewelry. There were no diamonds. There was paper. Stacks and stacks of paper that were worth more than the entire neighborhood my daughter lived in. I ran my fingers over the deeds to 3 commercial shopping centers in downtown Chicago. I touched the municipal bonds that had been maturing since the 90s, and at the bottom lay the thick leather-bound ledger that contained the truth about my life. Tiana thought I was a mechanic. She thought I spent my days changing oil and fixing transmissions for minimum wage. She never asked why I came home smelling of earth and iron. She never asked why the city engineers called our house late at night. I wasn't just a mechanic. I was the lead contractor for the city's underground infrastructure modernization project for 2 decades. I laid the pipes that kept this city running. I designed the valve systems that prevented floods in the commercial district. I invested every check back into the land that nobody wanted because it was too swampy or too far from the center until the city expanded and made me a millionaire 10 times over. I kept it a secret because I wanted Tiana to learn the value of $1. I wanted her to build her own character, not rest on my laurels. I wanted her to love me for being her father, not for being her bank account. Looking at those papers now, I realized my experiment had failed. She didn't value the dollar, she valued the appearance of wealth. And she didn't love me, she tolerated me. I was just an old man in her way. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence. I pulled it out, expecting an apology. Maybe Tiana had come to her senses. Maybe she realized she had left her grieving father in the rain. I answered without looking at the screen. "Hello. If you think you are going to sneak back in here tonight to steal the antique clock from the mantel, you have another thing coming, old man." It was Bryce. His voice was shrill and nasty. "I am calling the police to report a potential break-in," he continued. "And do not even touch those jazz records in the den. I checked online and they are worth money. If anything is missing, I will have you arrested for theft. You hear me, Winston? I will press charges." I listened to him rant about a clock and some old vinyl records. That clock was a gift from a German engineer I worked with in Berlin in the 80s. The records were bought with my first paycheck. They were mine. But to Bryce, they were just assets. Items to be sold on eBay to pay off his gambling debts. He wasn't calling to see if I was safe. He wasn't calling to ask if I had found a place to sleep. He was calling to protect the few scraps of value he thought I had left behind. He had no idea he was shouting at a man who held the deed to the building his real estate office rented space in. "Are you done, Bryce?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "Don't you take that tone with me," he spat. "Just stay away. You are nothing but a burden." I ended the call. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. They wanted the things. They wanted the house. They wanted the money they thought would come when I eventually died. I closed the metal box and locked it. I picked up the internal phone and buzzed the manager. "Mr. Richardson," I said when he answered. "I need to make a withdrawal." "Certainly, Mr. Winston. How much would you like a check for?" "No check," I said. "Cash. I need $20,000 in large bills. Right now." There was a pause. "Of course, sir. I will bring it to the secure room immediately." 10 minutes later, I walked out of the bank with a thick envelope inside my jacket. The rain had stopped, but the air was colder. I stood on the sidewalk and pulled out my phone again. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. It rang once. "Henderson Law Firm." A deep voice answered. "Hello, Robert," I said. "It is Winston." "Winston." The lawyer's voice warmed instantly. "I heard about Beatrice. I am so sorry, my friend. I was going to reach out tomorrow." "Save your condolences, Robert," I said, cutting him off. "I need you to work tonight." "Work tonight, Winston. It is 6:00. What is going on?" I looked at the bank building behind me and then toward the direction of the cemetery where my wife lay. "They kicked me out, Robert, before the dirt was even dry. Bryce told me to pack my bags and never come back. Tiana let him do it." There was a silence on the other line, a heavy, dangerous silence. Robert Henderson had been my attorney and friend since we were both young men trying to make a mark in a world that didn't want us. He knew everything. He knew about the money. He knew about the trust fund. He knew about the house. He did what Robert asked, his voice low and sharp. "He told me to get out," I repeated. "They think I am destitute. They think I am going to a state nursing home." I took a deep breath, letting the anger fuel me. "Activate Protocol B." "Robert." "Protocol B." Robert stammered. "Winston, are you sure?" "That is the nuclear option. That freezes everything. The accounts, the trust, the automatic payments for the house bills, the insurance. It cuts them off completely. If we do this, there is no going back. They will be on the street in a month." I know, I said, watching the streetlights flicker on. "They made their choice. Now I am making mine." "Execute it. And Robert, I want you to hire a private investigator. I want to know everything Bryce has been doing, every dime he has spent, every person he has talked to. If he wants to treat me like a stranger, I am going to treat him like a target." "Consider it done, Winston," Robert said. "Where are you?" "I am hailing a cab," I said. "I am going to the Ritz-Carlton. And Robert, make sure the investigator finds out exactly how much debt my son-in-law is really in. I have a feeling $20,000 is just the tip of the iceberg." I hung up the phone and raised my hand for a taxi. This time I didn't look like a lost old man. I looked like a man with a plan. Bryce wanted a war. He was about to find out that he had brought a knife to a gunfight. The taxi pulled up to the gleaming portico of the Ritz-Carlton, and the doorman hesitated for a fraction of a second before opening my door. I could not blame him. I looked like a drowned rat in a suit that had gone out of style 20 years ago. My shoes squelched on the red carpet as I walked toward the reception desk. The lobby smelled of fresh lilies and old money. It was a scent I knew well from my business dealings, but one I had kept away from my home life. A young woman with a tight bun and an even tighter smile looked up from her computer screen. She scanned my appearance, her eyes lingering on the mud stains on my trousers. "May I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I need a room," I said. "For the week. Do you have a reservation?" "No." She typed something on her keyboard, probably checking if security was nearby. "We are quite full tonight, sir. I am not sure if we have any standard rooms available." "I do not want a standard room," I said, leaning against the high counter. "I want a suite, the best one you have." She blinked, her composure slipping. "The presidential suite is available, but it is $5,000 a night." "That will be fine," I said, reaching into my wallet. I pulled out the credit card I had used for 15 years. It was a joint card linked to the family account I had set up for Tiana to manage the household expenses. I had put my pension checks into that account every month. It had a limit high enough to buy a small car. I handed it to her. She swiped it. She frowned. She swiped it again. "I am sorry, sir," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This card has been declined." "That is impossible," I said. "There is over $50,000 in that account. Try it again." She tried a third time, then looked at the screen. "It says the card has been reported lost or stolen by the primary account holder. The account has been frozen for security." I stood there in the middle of that golden lobby and felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't the embarrassment. I didn't care what the receptionist thought of me. It was the realization of who had done this. Tiana. My daughter hadn't just watched her husband kick me out. She had actively participated in my destruction. She knew I would need a hotel. She knew I would need food. And she had called the bank, likely, the moment I walked out of the cemetery gates to report the card stolen. She wanted to make sure I had absolutely nothing. She wanted me stranded on the street in the rain with no money and no shelter so that I would have no choice but to crawl back to them. She wanted to break me so completely that I would gratefully accept that state-run nursing home just to have a bed. It was a tactical move, cold, calculated, and heartbreaking. She wasn't just weak, she was complicit. She was trying to starve her own father into submission. The receptionist looked at me with pity now. "Sir, if you cannot provide another form of payment, I am afraid I have to ask you to leave." I looked at her, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who held 4 aces while his opponent was betting the farm on a pair of 2s. "I understand," I said. I reached into the inside pocket of my damp jacket and pulled out the thick envelope I had just taken from the bank manager. I placed it on the counter. The thud it made was heavy and satisfying. I opened the flap and fanned out the stacks of crisp $100 bills. $20,000 in cash. "Will this cover the deposit?" I asked. The receptionist's eyes went wide. She looked from the money to me and back to the money. She swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. That will certainly cover it. I want the presidential suite," I said, pushing the money toward her. "And I want total privacy. If anyone calls asking for Winston, they are to be told I am not here. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," she stammered, counting the bills with trembling fingers. 10 minutes later, I was standing in a living room larger than the entire ground floor of my house. There were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, crystal chandeliers, and a bathroom stocked with soaps that cost more than Bryce's shoes. I stripped off my wet clothes and threw them into the corner. I stood under the hot shower, letting the water wash away the cemetery mud and the chill of the grave. When I stepped out wrapped in a thick white robe, my phone buzzed on the marble vanity. It was a message from JT. Jerome Thomas was a man I had known since Vietnam. He had been a tunnel rat in the war and a private investigator for 40 years since. He didn't talk much, but he saw everything. When I asked him to watch my house, I knew he would be thorough. The message was a single photo followed by a video clip. I sat on the edge of the king-sized bed and opened the photo. It was taken through the front window of my house. The curtains were open. Inside, Bryce and Tiana were sitting in the living room, but they weren't mourning. They weren't crying over Beatrice. Bryce was holding a bottle of wine, my wine, a vintage Bordeaux I had been saving for my 50th anniversary. He was pouring it into 2 glasses while Tiana laughed, her head thrown back. They looked like they had just won the lottery. I clicked on the video. JT must have had a parabolic microphone aimed at the glass because the audio was crisp. "To freedom," Bryce said, raising his glass. "The old witch is dead, and the old man is gone. We finally have the place to ourselves." Tiana clinked her glass against his. "Do you think he will come back?" she asked, taking a sip. "Where else is he going to go?" Bryce scoffed. "He has no money. I bet he is sleeping on a bench right now. Give it 2 days. He will come back begging, and we will drive him straight to the nursing home. I already signed the intake papers this morning." He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "And the best part," Bryce continued, walking over to the window and looking out right at where JT was hiding. "I already called the realtor. He says, in this market, we can get $600,000 for this place. We sell it, we pay off my debts, and we still have enough to buy a condo in Florida. We are rich, babe." I stared at the screen, my hand gripping the phone so hard I thought the glass might crack. They weren't just celebrating my exile. They were celebrating the sale of my home. They thought the deed was theirs. They thought the title was clear. Bryce thought he was a genius who had just pulled off the heist of the century. He didn't know about the trust. I typed a reply to JT. "Keep watching them. If they try to sell anything, let me know. And JT, find out who his debts are with. I want names." I put the phone down and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Bryce thought I was sleeping on a bench. He thought I was broken. He was about to find out that he was living in a house of cards and I was the wind. Tomorrow, the real game would begin, and I wasn't going to play fair. The pounding on the door of the presidential suite shattered the morning silence like a hammer hitting steel. I was sitting by the window drinking black coffee and watching the sunrise paint the Chicago skyline in hues of orange and gray. I had not slept. My mind had been too busy cataloging every asset, every account, and every legal maneuver I would need for the war that had just begun. I glanced at the ornate grandfather clock in the corner. 7 a.m. Too early for housekeeping. Too aggressive for room service. I tightened the belt of my plush robe and walked to the door. I checked the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the hallway, their hands resting near their holsters, their faces set in grim, professional masks. Behind them, hovering nervously near the elevator bank, was the hotel manager. I opened the door just wide enough to show my face. "Can I help you, officers?" Mr. Winston, the taller officer, asked. He was young with a buzz cut and eyes that scanned the room behind me looking for threats. "I am Winston. We received a call concerning your welfare, sir. We need you to step out of the room. A welfare check at the Ritz-Carlton." I almost laughed. "I am perfectly fine, officer. As you can see, I am having my morning coffee. Who called you?" "Your son-in-law, Bryce Miller, called us, sir. He reported that you are suffering from advanced dementia and that you wandered away from your wife's funeral yesterday in a state of confusion. He also stated that you have a history of violent outbursts when you are off your medication. We have an order here to transport you to County General for a psychiatric evaluation." My blood ran cold. Bryce. He wasn't just trying to kick me out, he was trying to erase my credibility. If the police dragged me out of here in handcuffs raving about how I was a millionaire contractor, I would look exactly like the senile old man he claimed I was. Once I was in the system, sedated and labeled, he could file for emergency guardianship. He could take control of everything before I even had a chance to call my lawyer. It was a brilliant, evil move. And it was happening right now. "Sir, step out of the room now," the officer said, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "We do not want to use force, but we will if necessary for your own protection." I looked at the handcuffs. I looked at the officers. They saw an old black man in a bathrobe in a room they probably thought I had stolen a keycard to access. The narrative was already written in their heads. "Wait," I said, raising my hands slowly, palms open. "I am not resisting. But before you take me anywhere, I would like you to look at something. It is right here on the console table." The officer hesitated. "What is it?" "Proof that my son-in-law is lying," I said calmly. I stepped back, leaving the door open. The officers exchanged a look, then followed me inside. The luxury of the suite seemed to give them pause. They looked around at the marble floors and the silk curtains, clearly confused as to how a confused vagrant had afforded this. I picked up a manila envelope from the table. I had called Dr. Eris Thorne, a forensic psychiatrist I had worked with on competency cases for my construction firm, at 4 a.m., offering him double his rate for an emergency house call. He had left 20 minutes ago. "This is a competency evaluation performed this morning by Dr. Eris Thorne," I said, handing the document to the tall officer. "It is notarized. It states clearly that I am of sound mind, fully oriented to time and place, and suffering from zero cognitive decline." The officer took the paper and read it, his brow furrowing. "This is dated today, 6 a.m. "I anticipated this," I said, pouring myself another cup of coffee. "My son-in-law is a desperate man, officer. He has gambling debts. He is trying to sell my house out from under me. The only way he can do that is if I'm declared incompetent." The officer looked at his partner, then back at me. "Sir, Mr. Miller said you were wandering the streets in the rain. He said you didn't know your own name." I took a sip of coffee. "Mr. Miller also told you I have a history of violence. Check your records, officer. Do I have a record? Have the police ever been called to my home in 40 years? The officer pulled out his radio and murmured a request to dispatch. A minute later, the radio crackled back. "No priors, no history of domestic calls at the residence. He lied to you," I said, my voice hardening. "He filed a false police report to use you as his personal muscle. He wants me locked up so he can liquidate my assets." The officer lowered the paper. "Sir, even if you are competent, we have a report of a missing person. Your daughter is worried sick. My daughter." I said, feeling a fresh wave of pain, knows exactly where I am. "She froze my bank account yesterday, officer." If she was so worried about my safety, why would she cut off my access to funds? Does that sound like someone concerned for my welfare or someone trying to starve me into submission? The officers were silent. The narrative was cracking. "And one more thing," I said, picking up my phone. "Bryce told you I wandered off. He told you I was lost. Look at this." I opened my Google Maps timeline and held the screen up to the officer's face. "This is my location history for the last 24 hours. Cemetery, bank, hotel, nowhere else. I didn't wander. I executed a transaction and checked into a hotel. Now look at this." I swiped to a screenshot JT had sent me 10 minutes ago. It was a location track from a burner phone Bryce kept in his glove box, a number JT had traced overnight. "This is my son-in-law's location last night," I said, pointing to the red dot on the map. While he was supposedly frantic with worry about his missing father-in-law, he was here, at the Rivers Casino, from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. The officer leaned in closer, looking at the timestamp. "He was gambling, officer," I said. "Betting money he doesn't have, hoping that if he gets rid of me he can pay off the sharks before they break his legs. That is the man who sent you here. That is the man who wasted police resources to harass a grieving widower." The officer straightened up. He handed me back the medical report. His demeanor had changed. The aggression was gone, replaced by a professional embarrassment. "Mr. Winston, I apologize for the disturbance," he said. "It appears we were given incomplete information." "You were used," I corrected him gently. "And I don't blame you. He is a very convincing liar." "We will need to file a report about the false call," the officer said, taking out his notebook. "Do you want to press charges for harassment?" "Not yet," I said. "Let him sweat. Just do me a favor, officer. When you call him back, tell him you found me. Tell him I am safe, and tell him I am not confused. Tell him I am very, very focused." The officer nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I think you will get the message, sir." They left, closing the heavy door behind them. I listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline. I had won the first skirmish, but Bryce wouldn't stop. He was desperate now. He had played his ace, the insanity card, and I had trumped it. He would be furious. He would be terrified, and a terrified man is a dangerous man. I walked back to the window and looked down at the city. Somewhere out there, Bryce was probably waking up with a hangover, wondering if his plan had worked. He was about to get a phone call that would ruin his morning. I picked up my phone and dialed Henderson. "Robert," I said when he answered. "The police just left. Bryce tried to have me committed." I knew it, the lawyer swore. "Is everything okay?" "I handled it," I said. "But we need to move up the timeline. He is escalating. If he is willing to call the cops, he is willing to do worse." "What do you want to do, Winston?" "I want to talk to Tiana," I said, "but not on the phone. I want to see if there is anything left of my daughter in there or if she is completely gone, and I want to know why she froze my account." I hung up and started to get dressed. I put on a fresh suit, one I had ordered from the hotel concierge the night before. It was sharp, expensive, tailored. It was the suit of a man who commanded respect, not pity. I was done hiding who I was. It was time for my family to meet the real Winston. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind the retreating officers when my phone began to vibrate against the mahogany tabletop. The screen lit up with a photo of Tiana smiling at her college graduation, a photo from a time when her eyes were bright with ambition instead of shadowed by her husband's debts. I stared at it for a long moment, letting it ring. I needed to steel myself. I needed to remember that the woman calling me was not the girl in the picture, but the accomplice who had frozen my bank accounts. I swiped accept and put the phone to my ear without saying a word. "Dad! Oh my God, Dad! Are you crazy?" Her voice was shrill, bordering on hysterical. It wasn't the relief of a daughter finding a lost father. It was the panic of a conspirator whose plan was unraveling. "You called the police on Bryce," she sobbed. "You humiliated him. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "The neighbors saw the squad car. They are talking, Dad. You are making us look like criminals." I walked over to the mirror, adjusting my tie. "I did not call the police, Tiana," I said calmly. "Your husband did. He tried to have me committed. I simply proved him wrong. He was trying to help you," she cried, and I could hear the wet sniffle that used to break my heart when she was a child. "He is worried about you." "We both are. You are not acting like yourself, checking into a hotel, spending money we do not have. You are having a breakdown and you need to come home right now so we can take care of you." "Take care of me," I repeated, testing the weight of the words. "Is that what you call cutting off my access to food and shelter?" "Taking care of me. We had to stop you from hurting yourself," she insisted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, Dad, we found a place. It is called Shady Groves. It is state-funded, so it won't eat up your pension. They have a bed open today. It is clean and the nurses are nice. Bryce says if you come home now, he will drive you there himself. We can put this whole ugly mess behind us. You just need to sign the intake forms." It is for the best. Really. I listened to her plead, to her desperate attempt to sell me on a warehouse for the dying as if it were a vacation resort. And as her voice droned on, I drifted back 30 years. I saw a 10-year-old girl with braided hair sitting on the stoop of our old apartment building crying because the neighborhood kids had stolen her jump rope. I remembered sitting beside her wiping her tears with my grease-stained thumb. I remembered telling her Tiana family comes first. The world is hard, baby girl, and it does not love us. So we have to love each other. We have to protect each other because nobody else will. We are a fortress, Tiana. You and me and your mama. I had drilled that into her head. I had preached loyalty and unity as the highest virtues. And now I realized with a sickening lurch in my stomach that she had twisted my lesson into a noose. She was using family as a weapon against me. She was telling herself that betraying her father was necessary to protect her husband, to preserve the unit she had chosen. She believed that sacrificing me was the price of keeping her own fortress standing. But her fortress was built on sand and lies. I realized then that her weakness wasn't just a flaw, it was dangerous. A weak person will do anything to survive, including feeding their own father to the wolves. She wasn't a victim. She was the knife Bryce was using to cut my throat. The little girl on the stoop was gone. In her place stood a woman who would trade my dignity for a quiet life with a gambler. "Dad, are you listening to me?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "You need to come home. We can't afford this hotel. You are wasting the inheritance." The inheritance. There it was. The truth wrapped in a slip of the tongue. "I am listening, Tiana," I said. My voice was devoid of warmth. "I am listening very closely." Just then, my other phone, the burner I had bought for JT, buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a text message followed by a grainy photo. The text read, "He is tearing the place apart, looking for the red book." The photo showed my home office. Papers were strewn everywhere. Books were pulled from the shelves and thrown onto the floor. The safe I kept in the closet was open and empty. Bryce was standing in the middle of the chaos, red-faced and sweating, holding a crowbar. He was looking for the original deed. He was looking for the ledger. He was looking for the documentation that would allow him to sell the house quickly and quietly before the probate court even processed Beatrice's death certificate. He thought if he held the physical paper, he held the power. He didn't know I had emptied that safe 2 days before Beatrice died. He didn't know the deed was currently sitting in the inside pocket of the suit jacket I was wearing. I put the burner phone away and brought Tiana back to my ear. "Tiana," I said, cutting through her rambling about the nursing home's meal plan. "Tell your husband to stop." "Stop what?" she stammered. He is cleaning up the office. He is trying to organize Mom's things. He is looking for the deed, Tiana." I said, my voice cold and hard. "He is looking for the title to the house. He wants to sell it. He thinks if he finds that piece of paper, he can pay off his bookie." There was a stunned silence on the line. How did I know about the bookie? How did I know what Bryce was doing in the privacy of the home I had been exiled from? "Dad." "That is crazy," she whispered. "We aren't selling the house. That is our home." "It is my home, Tiana," I corrected her. "I bought it. I paid for every brick. And tell Bryce he is wasting his energy. The safe is empty because I emptied it." You what?" "I have the deed, Tiana. It is right here in my pocket next to my heart. And tell him I have the ledger too. I know about the second mortgage he tried to take out last year, the one the bank denied because he forged my signature. I have the rejection letter." "Dad, stop. You are scaring me," she cried. "Just come home. Give us the papers. We can talk about this. Bryce just wants to help." "Bryce wants to save his own skin," I said. "And you are helping him hold the shovel while he digs my grave. I am not coming home, Tiana. Not to that house. Not to you. You made your choice when you let him lock me out in the rain. You chose your husband over your father. Now you have to live with that choice." "Dad, please," she wailed. "I am checking out of this hotel in an hour," I said. "But I am not going to Shady Groves. I am going to war. Tell Bryce to get a good lawyer. He is going to need one." I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it for a second as her tiny, tinny voice screamed my name. Then I pressed the red button, ending the call. I turned the phone off and tossed it onto the bed. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose. I walked over to the mirror and adjusted my tie one last time. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but the confusion was gone. I knew exactly who my daughter was now, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I picked up the envelope of cash and the file folder containing the deed. I walked out of the presidential suite and didn't look back. The game had changed. Bryce wanted to play dirty. He had no idea he was playing against the man who wrote the rules. My phone screen went dark, but the war had just begun. I knew Bryce. I knew him better than he knew himself. He was a man who built his life on shortcuts, and when a wall appeared in front of him, he didn't climb it, he tried to dig under it. I knew that my revelation about the deed in my pocket wouldn't stop him. It would only make him frantic. It would make him reckless. And a reckless man makes mistakes that send him to prison. Less than an hour after I hung up on Tiana, my burner phone buzzed again. JT had shifted his surveillance from the window to a parked car down the street. The message was simple. He is leaving. He looks manic. He has a briefcase. I sat in the lobby of the hotel watching the city move past the glass and waited. I knew where he was going. He wasn't going to a legitimate lawyer. No decent attorney would touch a property sale where the resident had just been kicked out during a funeral. Bryce was going to the underbelly of the real estate world. He was going to file for a lost deed. He was going to claim the original paperwork was destroyed in a flood or a fire or simply misplaced in the grief of losing his mother-in-law. He was going to forge my signature on an affidavit stating I had no interest in the property. He was betting on the speed of the bureaucracy being slower than the speed of his greed. He needed cash today, not next month. By noon, JT sent me the confirmation. He had followed Bryce to a title company in a strip mall on the edge of town, the kind of place that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation, where they didn't ask too many questions if you slid an extra $100 across the desk. Bryce walked out 20 minutes later looking like he had just injected adrenaline straight into his veins. He was on the phone gesturing wildly. He was setting up a sale, a cash sale, fast, no inspections, no contingencies. I went back up to my suite and connected my laptop to the secure server JT had set up. A new video file popped up. This one was from a small camera JT had managed to stick to the mailbox while Bryce was gone. A black SUV pulled into my driveway. A man in a cheap, shiny suit stepped out. He looked like a shark in human skin. I recognized him. His name was Vinny Sleek, a flipper who bought distressed properties for pennies on the dollar painted over the mold and sold them to unsuspecting families. He was the bottom of the barrel. Bryce met him at the door. I turned up the volume on my laptop. "The place is a gold mine," Bryce said, his voice high and tight. "We just need it gone. The previous owner, my father-in-law, he passed away last week. Heart attack right after his wife died. Tragedy, really. But the house is vacant. You can move a crew in tomorrow." I felt a vein throb in my temple. He had killed me off. To this stranger, I was just another dead body, an inconvenience to be swept aside so he could get his payout. Dead Vinny asked, looking at the house with greedy eyes. "So no probate issues, no angry relatives coming out of the woodwork, clean title." Bryce lied smoothly. "My wife is the sole heir. We just want to liquidate and move to Florida. Too many bad memories here." "Let us take a look," Vinny said. They walked inside. I watched them move through the rooms I had painted. I watched Vinny kick the baseboards I had installed with my own hands. I watched him sneer at the kitchen Beatrice had loved so much. $70 grand, Vinny said, standing in the middle of my living room. "Cash. Today. 70. Bryce sputtered. "It is worth 400 easy." "Not in this condition," Vinny shrugged. "It smells like old people. I have to gut it. New floors, new kitchen, new roof. 70 is the offer. Take it or leave it." Bryce hesitated. I could see the wheels turning in his head. $70,000 wasn't the $600,000 he had bragged about, but it was enough to keep his kneecaps intact. It was enough to pay off the most dangerous of his debts. "Fine," Bryce said. 70. But I need the deposit now. 10 grand today, the rest when we sign the papers on Friday. "Done," Vinny said, extending a hand. They walked back out to the front porch. And that is when my heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Before leaving, Vinny pointed to a pile of boxes near the door. "What is all that junk?" "Just the old man's crap," Bryce said. "Old clothes, knickknacks, garbage." "Get rid of it," Vinny ordered. "I want this place empty. I don't want to haul away dead people's trash." "No problem," Bryce said. He grabbed the first box. It was a cardboard box marked Beatrice. I knew what was inside. Her sewing kit. The quilt she had been working on for our granddaughter before she got sick. Her collection of porcelain angels she had gathered for 30 years. Bryce walked to the curb where the large green garbage bin stood. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look inside. He turned the box upside down over the open bin. I watched on the screen as the porcelain angels crashed into the plastic bottom, shattering. I watched the quilt soil with the grime of the bin. He threw the sewing tin on top of it, the metal clanging like a funeral bell. Then he went back for my things, my engineering manuals, the framed photo of my crew from the big tunnel project in '95. He threw them all away like they were nothing but rot. He dusted his hands off, looking satisfied. "The trash truck comes tomorrow morning," he told Vinny. "It will all be gone." I sat in the silence of the hotel suite staring at the screen. My hands were not shaking anymore. They were stone still. A cold fury unlike anything I had ever felt settled into my marrow. He hadn't just stolen my home, he had desecrated my life. He had thrown away the last tangible pieces of the woman I loved to make room for a crook who called my home a gut job. I picked up my phone and dialed Henderson. "Robert," I said, my voice dead calm. "He is selling the house." "What?" Robert exclaimed. "He can't. The title is clouded. You are still alive." "He filed for a lost deed," I said. "He is selling it to a cash flipper for 70 grand. He is taking a $10,000 deposit today. We have to stop him," Robert said, urgency flooding his tone. "I can get an emergency injunction. I can call the title company. I can have a sheriff there in 20 minutes to shut it down. We can save the house, Winston." "No," I said. There was a pause on the line. "No," Robert asked, confused. "Winston, if he takes that money, it creates a massive legal headache. We have to intervene. Let him take the money, Robert," I said. "But why?" "Because of the life estate clause," I said. I heard Robert suck in a breath. He knew exactly what I was talking about. It was a detail we had buried in the deed transfer 20 years ago, a safety mechanism I had insisted on just in case Tiana ever lost her way. "The house is in Tiana's name, yes," I continued, my eyes fixed on the image of Bryce shaking hands with the shark. "But the deed has a restrictive covenant, a life estate. It grants me Winston's sole and exclusive right of possession and habitation until my death. Tiana holds the remainder interest, but she owns nothing she can sell while I am breathing. The property cannot be transferred, mortgaged, or sold without my signature releasing the life estate." "And Bryce doesn't know," Robert whispered. "Bryce thinks he is a real estate mogul because he watches television shows," I said. "He never read the original deed. He never did a title search. He just sees a name on a piece of paper and thinks it is a blank check." "So if he accepts that money," Robert said, his lawyer brain catching up to my strategy. "If he accepts that money," I said, finishing his thought, "he is selling something he does not own. He is entering into a fraudulent contract. He is taking cash under false pretenses. That is not a civil dispute, Robert. That is grand larceny. That is real estate fraud. That is a felony." Robert let out a low whistle. "You want him to commit the crime. I want him to hang himself," I said. "If we stop him now, he just gets a slap on the wrist for trying. If he takes that $10,000, he crosses a line he can never come back from. He goes to prison. It is risky," Winston, Robert warned. "If Vinny finds out, he might come after you." "Let him come," I said. "I am already dead, remember." Bryce said so. I watched the screen. Bryce was smiling, taking a thick envelope from Vinny. He was counting the cash right there on the porch, standing over the trash can filled with my wife's memories. He looked so happy. He looked so relieved. He thought his problems were over. "Let him take the deposit, Robert," I commanded. "Let him spend it. Let him think he got away with it. And on Friday, when he goes to sign the final papers, I want you there. I want you to walk in with the original deed and the life estate clause, and I want you to watch his face when he realizes he just sold a house that belongs to a ghost." "Understood, Winston," Robert said. "I will have the paperwork ready." I hung up. On the screen, Bryce was waving goodbye to Vinny. He walked back into the house, clutching the cash to his chest. He probably felt like a king. He didn't know that the $10,000 in his hand wasn't a lifeline. It was the evidence that would put him in a cage. He had thrown my life in the trash. Now I was going to throw his life into the incinerator, and I was going to enjoy watching it burn. The notification from JT arrived just as I was finishing a stale sandwich from the hotel minibar. "Turn on camera for Winston. You are not going to like this." Camera 4 was positioned directly at the detached garage behind the main house. It was the only place Bryce hadn't ransacked yet, mostly because he didn't know where the key was hidden. But looking at the feed I saw, he hadn't needed a key. The side door was hanging off its hinges, the wood splintered by the crowbar lying in the grass. The garage door rolled up slowly with a mechanical groan, revealing the one possession I valued almost as much as the house itself, my 1968 Cadillac DeVille. It was powder blue with a pristine white convertible top. I had bought it as a rusted heap 20 years ago and spent 5 years restoring every bolt and valve with my own hands. It wasn't just a car, it was Beatrice's chariot. We drove it to church on Sundays. We drove it to the lake on our anniversary. She loved that car more than she loved jewelry. She used to say it made her feel like a queen. Bryce walked around it running his greedy hand over the wax finish I had applied just last week. He was smiling that oily smile of his. He opened the driver's side door and slid in. I watched the engine roar to life, a deep, throaty rumble I had tuned to perfection. He backed it out of the driveway, scraping the undercarriage against the curb because he didn't have the skill to handle a machine with that much weight and soul. He didn't head toward the title company this time. He drove toward the Gold Coast, the trendy part of town where the rents were high and the morals were loose. He pulled up to the curb in front of a glass high-rise. A woman walked out. She was young, maybe 25, with blonde hair extensions and a dress that cost more than Tiana's wedding ring. It wasn't Tiana. It wasn't even close. Bryce leaned over and opened the passenger door. She hopped in laughing and threw her arms around his neck. He kissed her right there on the street in broad daylight in my dead wife's car. My stomach turned. He wasn't just a thief and a gambler. He was an adulterer. He was spending the money he expected to get from my grave on a mistress, while my daughter sat at home grieving her mother. But then he did something that made the rage in my chest turn into white-hot lava. He got out of the car. He walked around to the passenger side. He let her drive. He let this stranger, this woman who meant nothing, sit in the seat where Beatrice used to sit wearing her Sunday hat. He let her put her manicured hands on the steering wheel I had polished. I watched through the dashboard camera JT had hacked into. She revved the engine, laughing like a child with a new toy. She lit a cigarette and ashed it on the dashboard, on the pristine leather dashboard. That was it. He could steal my money. He could sell my house. But he would not disrespect Beatrice's memory like that. Not while I still had breath in my lungs. He forgot who I was. He forgot that I wasn't just a man who drove cars. I was a man who built them. When I restored the Cadillac, I didn't just polish the chrome. I updated the internals. I installed a GPS tracker and a remote kill switch connected to the ignition system. It was a precaution against theft. I never imagined the thief would be my own son-in-law. I opened the app on my laptop. The little blue dot representing the Cadillac was moving north on Michigan Avenue, heading right into the heart of the afternoon rush hour. They were laughing. I could hear them through the internal mic. They were talking about Florida, about the condo they would buy, about how easy it was to fool Tiana. I waited. I watched the map. I waited until the blue dot was right in the middle of the busiest intersection in the city, surrounded by buses, taxis, and angry commuters. I waited until the light turned green. Now I whispered. I clicked the button labeled Lockout Protocol. On the screen, the car jerked violently. The engine cut out instantly. The power steering locked. The power brakes stiffened. The Cadillac rolled to a halt, dead center in the intersection, blocking 3 lanes of traffic. Then the second part of my security protocol kicked in, the alarm system. It wasn't a standard car alarm. It was an industrial siren I had salvaged from a construction site. It began to scream, a high-piercing wail that echoed off the skyscrapers. The headlights flashed stroboscopically. The horn blared in a rhythmic panic-inducing blast. Inside the car, chaos erupted. The woman screamed, dropping her cigarette on the floor mat. Bryce was frantically turning the key, slamming his hands against the steering wheel, trying to restart the beast. But the Cadillac was dead. I had turned it into a 4,000-pound brick. Outside, the horns began to blare. Traffic backed up for blocks instantly. People were shouting. And then I saw the flashing blue lights. A Chicago traffic cop on a motorcycle weaved through the gridlock and pulled up next to the driver's window. He looked angry. "You cannot block Michigan Avenue at 5 o'clock. I switched to the external camera view from the dash cam. The officer tapped on the glass. The woman rolled it down, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "License and registration," the officer barked, shouting over the siren that was still wailing. The woman looked at Bryce. Bryce looked at the woman. He didn't have the registration. The registration was in the glove box, but it was in my name, and the insurance card was in Beatrice S.'s name. And neither of them had a valid reason to be driving a car reported as part of a frozen estate. "She doesn't have it," Bryce yelled, trying to lean over. "It is my father-in-law's car." The officer looked at the young woman in the driver's seat, then at Bryce. "Is this your father-in-law, sir?" "No," Bryce stammered. He is unavailable." "Step out of the vehicle," the officer ordered. "Both of you." They stepped out into the rain of honking horns and jeering pedestrians. The news helicopter, which usually hovered over the interstate for the traffic report, swung low to investigate the source of the massive jam. I turned on the television in my hotel room and flipped to the local news. There it was, live in high definition, my beautiful blue Cadillac sitting dead in the intersection lights flashing. And standing next to it looking like a deer in headlights was Bryce holding hands with a blonde woman who was definitely not his wife. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Vintage car causes traffic nightmare on Magmile." I zoomed in on the laptop. Bryce was arguing with the cop. The cop was shaking his head. He was calling a tow truck. And then he was putting Bryce in the back of the squad car, not under arrest yet, but detained for obstructing traffic and driving a vehicle with questionable ownership. The mistress was left standing on the curb, looking furious and abandoned, covering her face from the news cameras. I picked up my phone and dialed Tiana. I didn't say anything when she answered. I just held the phone up to the television speaker so she could hear the reporter describing the scene. Then I hung up. Bryce wanted to drive my car. He wanted to drive my life. Now he was going to see exactly where that road led. Straight to a jail cell and straight to a divorce court. The car was safe. The police would impound it and I would pick it up tomorrow with my title and my spare key. But Bryce's reputation that was totaled. The local news broadcast cut to a commercial for car insurance, but the image of my son-in-law being shoved into the back of a squad car was burned into my retinas. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed waiting for my phone to ring. I expected Tiana to be hysterical. I expected her to be furious at Bryce. I expected her to finally see the man she married for the fraud he was. I was ready to comfort her. I was ready to tell her that I would help her get a divorce lawyer that we could rebuild. I was ready to be her father again. When the phone finally buzzed 10 minutes later, I answered it with a heavy heart, prepared to hear her sobbing about betrayal. "You did this." Her voice wasn't sad. It was venomous. It was a shriek of pure, unadulterated rage aimed directly at me. I blinked, confused. I held the phone tighter. "Tiana, did you see the news? Bryce was arrested. He was driving my car with another woman." "He was helping a friend," she screamed, cutting me off. "He told me everything, Dad. He called me from the station. That poor girl was stranded, and Bryce, being the good man, he has offered to drive her home. He borrowed the car because his was in the shop. And you sick, vindictive old man, you set him up. You remotely locked the car just to humiliate him. You called the cops. You ruined an innocent man's reputation because you are jealous." I sat there, stunned into silence. The delusion was absolute. Bryce had spun a lie so thin you could see right through it, and she had wrapped herself in it like a warm blanket. She saw her husband holding hands with a blonde in a convertible, and she chose to believe he was a good Samaritan. She saw me protecting my property, and she chose to see a villain. "He was kissing her, Tiana," I said, my voice low. "I saw it on the camera." "Liar," she spat. "You doctored the footage. You have always hated him. You have always been jealous that I love him more than I love you. You are selfish, Dad. You are a petty, selfish old man who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. You would rather destroy my marriage than admit you are irrelevant." Irrelevant. The word hung in the air. I had paid for her college. I had paid for her wedding. I had paid her mortgage for 10 years without her knowing. And I was irrelevant. But she wasn't finished. She had one more dagger to throw, and she aimed it straight for the oldest wound in my heart. "You know what, Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Bryce is right about you. You are a miser. You sit on your piles of secret money like a dragon while the rest of us suffer. And you know what else? Mom would still be alive if it wasn't for you." The air left my lungs. The room started to spin. "What did you say?" I whispered. "You heard me," she hissed. "Mom died because you were too cheap to pay for the best doctors." You let her rot in that county hospital because you didn't want to spend your precious millions. You could have flown her to specialists. You could have bought her more time. But no, you hoarded your cash. You let her die in pain so you could keep your bank account full. Are you taking it to the grave, Dad? Is the money warm enough to hold you at night? I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and agonizing, like a heart attack. My vision blurred. I remembered the nights I spent sleeping in a chair next to Beatrice's hospital bed, holding her hand while she faded. I remembered the meetings with the best oncologists in Chicago, the ones I paid cash to see. I remembered them telling me, Mr. Winston, the cancer is everywhere. Surgery would only cause her agony. The kindest thing you can do is let her go gently. I had spent thousands on palliative care to make sure she never felt a moment of pain. I had bought the best morphine, the softest sheets. I had hired private nurses to watch her breathe so she was never alone. I had done everything humanly possible. And Tiana, who had visited her mother maybe 3 times in those final months, dared to tell me I killed her. She didn't know the truth. She didn't care about the truth. She only knew the twisted version of reality Bryce had fed her to justify their greed. They needed me to be the villain so they didn't have to feel like monsters for robbing me. Tiana. I said, my voice shaking not with age but with a fury so deep it felt like magma. Your mother died knowing she was loved. You are living a lie. Rot in hell, Dad, she said. Don't call us. Don't come back. We will get Bryce out and we will sue you for everything you have. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time holding the silent phone. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the luxurious suite. I looked at my reflection in the mirror across the room. I saw an old man with tears running down his face. But beneath the tears, I saw something else. I saw the man who had built tunnels under a river. I saw the man who had negotiated contracts with mobsters and politicians and never blinked. My daughter was gone. The girl I raised was dead, buried under layers of entitlement and weakness. The woman who just called me was an enemy. She had desecrated her mother's memory to score a point in an argument. She had sided with the parasite who was eating her alive. I realized then that I could not save her with love. Love was what got us here. I had loved her too much. I had shielded her from the rain so she never learned to build a roof. I had given her everything so she valued nothing. There was only one way to save her now. I had to destroy her life. I had to burn her world to the ground so she could see the ashes of the man she married. I had to be the villain she accused me of being. I wiped my face with a handkerchief. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were coming on a million little sparks in the darkness. I picked up my phone and dialed Robert Henderson. He answered on the first ring. Winston. I saw the news about the car. Are you okay? I am fine. Robert, I said. My voice was steady now, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a general ordering an airstrike. Did you speak to Tiana? Robert asked gently. I did, I said. She is with him, Robert. She is gone. I am so sorry, Winston. Don't be, I said. We have work to do. Robert, I want you to execute the final phase of Protocol B. Immediately. Everything Robert asked. Even the utilities. Everything I said. I want you to cut the power to the house. I want you to cut the water. I want you to cancel the internet and the cable. I want you to revoke the insurance on every vehicle, including hers. I want you to freeze the secondary credit cards she uses for groceries. I want you to stop the automatic payments for her student loans. Winston. That is harsh, Robert warned. It is going to be 90 degrees tomorrow. Without AC, that house will be an oven. Good, I said. Let them sweat. Let them feel the heat. And Robert, I continued, contact the private hospital where she gets her prescriptions filled. Cancel my guarantee. If she wants her anxiety medication, she can pay for it herself. There was a pause on the line. You are cutting the cord completely. I am not just cutting the cord, Robert, I said, looking out at the darkening sky. I am pulling the plug. Tiana thinks I am a miser. She thinks I let her mother die for money. So I am going to show her what life looks like when my money actually disappears. She wants to stand by her husband, fine. Let her see if his gambling debts can keep the lights on. I understand, Winston, Robert said, his voice professional and cold. I will make the calls now. By tomorrow morning, they will be living in the dark. Thank you, Robert. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a grim satisfaction. They wanted me gone. They wanted my presence erased from that house. Well, they were about to get their wish. I imagined Tiana waking up tomorrow morning. She would flip a switch and nothing would happen. She would turn a faucet and nothing would flow. She would reach for her phone to call for help and find that the service had been disconnected. She would look at Bryce for answers and he would have none. They had called me a burden. Tomorrow they would learn that I wasn't the burden. I was the foundation. And when you remove the foundation, the house falls down. I went to the minibar and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly, savoring the cool liquid. Tomorrow my daughter would be thirsty. Maybe then she would remember who carried the water all those years. The sun rose over Chicago like a blast furnace that Wednesday morning, bringing with it a heat wave that promised temperatures in the high 90s. I sat in the air-conditioned comfort of the hotel restaurant sipping an Earl Grey tea and watching the news on a tablet, but in my mind I was across town watching the inevitable collapse of my former home. I knew exactly what time Tiana woke up. 7:30 sharp. She would reach for the bedside lamp. Click. Nothing. She would frown and try the ceiling fan. Stillness. She would stumble into the bathroom to wash her face and turn the tap. A dry cough from the pipes, then silence. For 15 years my daughter had lived in a magical world, where the lights never flickered and the water always ran hot. She thought these were basic human rights provided by the universe. She did not know that every month, like clockwork, a sum was deducted from my secret account to cover the electric bill, the water, the gas, the high-speed internet, and the premium cable package Bryce insisted on having. They never saw a bill because I had set it to autopay before Bryce even moved in. I did it to help her get on her feet. I kept doing it because I loved her. Yesterday I canceled every single one of them. I imagined the panic setting in as the house began to heat up. The modern insulation that kept the warmth in during winter would now turn the place into an oven. The refrigerator would fall silent, the milk spoiling the freezer, dripping onto the floor. Tiana would grab her phone to call the utility company, expecting a simple outage. Instead, she would hear a polite recording telling her that the account had been closed by the primary account holder, not suspended, closed. She would realize that the account holder wasn't her husband. It was me. But the humiliation was just beginning. By noon, the temperature in the house would be unbearable, so Tiana did what she always did when she was stressed. She went shopping. I received a notification on my phone at 12:15. Attempted transaction at Whole Foods Market. $140, declined. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene. Tiana standing at the checkout counter, a line of impatient people behind her. She would be trying to buy organic vegetables and imported cheese comforts she felt entitled to. She would swipe the card again, smiling nervously at the cashier. The machine would beep that harsh rejection sound. Insufficient funds. Account frozen. She would try another card. The emergency card I gave her for car repairs. Declined. She would have to leave the groceries there. She would have to walk out of the store past the judgmental stares, her face burning with shame. Not from heat, but from poverty. For the first time in her adult life, she was feeling what it was like to be truly broke. While Tiana was facing the cashier, Bryce was facing a shark. Vinny, the house flipper, wasn't a man who checked his email for legal updates. He was a man who showed up when he smelled blood. My lawyer, Robert, had sent Vinny a cease and desist letter that morning explaining that the property sale was fraudulent due to the life estate clause. Vinny didn't care about the law. He cared about his money. JT sent me the audio from the bug he had planted in the kitchen. The quality was rough, but the fear in Bryce's voice was crystal clear. "I don't have it right now, Vinny." Bryce was stammering. The bank froze the accounts. "It is a misunderstanding. I just need a few days." "I don't give you days," Vinny growled. "You sold me a house you don't own. That is fraud. I want my 10 grand back, today. And because you wasted my time and made me look like an idiot, I want another 10 for my trouble. 20,000. By tonight. Or I start taking pieces of this house, and then I start taking pieces of you." The front door slammed. Bryce was left alone in the sweltering, silent house, terrified and broke. He realized then that the $70,000 windfall he had counted on was smoke. He had spent the deposit on gambling and gifts for his mistress, and now the bill was due. Around 2:00 they must have found each other in the wreckage of their living room. The heat was stifling. The internet was dead, so they couldn't even distract themselves with their phones. They looked at each other, and the terrible realization finally hit them. They weren't rich. They weren't successful. They weren't independent adults building a life. They were parasites. For a decade, they had strutted around pretending to be the masters of their domain, treating me like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. They had looked down on my worn clothes and my simple ways. But the clothes on their backs, the food in their bellies, the roof over their heads, it was all paid for by the old mechanic they despised. Without me, they were nothing. They were children playing house in a mansion they couldn't afford to heat. And instead of feeling gratitude for the years of support, instead of feeling remorse for their cruelty, they felt rage. It is the logic of the leech. The parasite does not thank the host. It gets angry when the host cuts it off. "We have to go to him," I heard Bryce scream on the recording. "He is at the Ritz. He has cash. I know he does. We have to make him fix this." They didn't wash up. They didn't change their sweaty clothes. They got into Tiana's car, which was running on fumes because I had canceled the fuel card too and drove straight to my hotel. They were fueled by entitlement and desperation, a dangerous combination. I was waiting for them. I was sitting in the VIP lounge near the lobby entrance drinking my tea and reading the Wall Street Journal. I looked like the millionaire I was. My suit was impeccable. My shoes were polished. I looked nothing like the man they had abandoned in the rain. They burst through the revolving doors like a storm. Tiana looked disheveled, her hair frizzy from the humidity, her eyes wild. Bryce looked manic, sweating profusely, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. They spotted me instantly. The contrast between us was stark. I was calm, cool, and collected. They were chaotic, loud, and unraveling. "You," Bryce shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me across the lobby. "You ruined everything. Turn it back on. Turn the power back on right now." He marched toward me, ignoring the gasps of the other guests. Tiana followed him, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, how could you?" she wailed. "I couldn't buy food. I had to leave the cart." Everyone stared at me. I slowly folded my newspaper and placed it on the table. I took a sip of tea. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at them with an expression of mild boredom. "I see you found your way here," I said. "Did you enjoy the drive? I hear traffic is terrible when you don't have air conditioning." "Give me the money," Bryce demanded, slamming his hand on the table, rattling the china. "Vinny is going to kill me. I need 20 grand. You have it. I know you have it. Give it to me, you selfish old man." I looked at his hand on the table. I looked at his face, twisted with greed and fear. "I am not giving you a dime, Bryce," I said, "and I am not turning the power back on. You wanted me out of your life. You wanted my things gone. Well, my money is one of my things, and it is gone too." "Dad, please," Tiana begged, grabbing my arm. "We are hot. We are hungry. We are your family." I pulled my arm away. "You are not my family," I said coldly. "You are strangers who broke into my house, and I don't support strangers." Bryce lunged for me. He reached for my lapel, his face purple with rage. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Before his fingers could touch my suit, a massive hand clamped onto his shoulder. The head of hotel security, a former linebacker named Marcus, who I had tipped very generously upon my arrival, spun Bryce around like a rag doll. Two other guards appeared out of nowhere, flanking Tiana. "Is there a problem?" Mr. Winston Marcus asked, his voice deep and threatening. "Yes, Marcus," I said, smoothing my jacket. "These people are bothering me. They are trespassers, and judging by the smell, they haven't showered. Please remove them from the premises." "But Dad..." Tiana screamed as a guard took her arm. "Get off me," Bryce yelled, struggling against Marcus's grip. "This is my father-in-law. He owes me." "He owes you nothing," Marcus said, dragging him toward the door. "You are disturbing the guests. Out, now." I watched them go. I watched as my son-in-law, who had sneered at me in the cemetery, was dragged backward across the marble floor, his heels skidding uselessly. I watched my daughter, who had turned her face away from my grief, being escorted out like a common vagrant. They were thrown onto the sidewalk into the heat and the noise of the city. I picked up my teacup. It was still warm. I took a sip. The silence in the lounge returned, but the air felt different. It felt lighter. For years I had carried them on my back. I had let them weigh me down, thinking it was my duty. But looking at the empty space where they had just stood, I realized something profound. I wasn't just teaching them a lesson. I was setting myself free. I signaled the waiter. "Another pot of tea, please," I said. "And bring the dessert menu. I think I have room for something sweet." Bryce did not go home to sit in the dark and think about his mistakes. He did not go to a shelter to reflect on his greed. A cornered rat does not pray for forgiveness, it bites. And Bryce decided to aim for the jugular. He knew he could not win a fair fight against me. He knew he could not win a financial fight against me. So he decided to take away my ability to fight at all. He went to see Dr. Coburn. Dr. Coburn was not a stranger. He was the specialist who had treated Beatrice in her final months. I had shaken his hand. I had thanked him for his kindness. I had written him a personal check for $5,000 as a bonus for his staff after the funeral. I thought he was a decent man. I did not know that he had a weakness for high-stakes poker and a mountain of debt that rivaled Bryce's own. Bryce walked into his office desperate and sweating, and he laid out a proposition. He didn't need a loan. He needed a signature. He needed a medical professional to state on the record that my grief had triggered a psychotic break. He needed a diagnosis of acute rapid-onset dementia. He needed a piece of paper that said Winston is a danger to himself and his assets. I can only imagine the conversation. Bryce promising a cut of the estate. Coburn looking at his own overdue bills. Two desperate men conspiring to erase a life. And Coburn signed. He took his oath to do no harm, and he set it on fire for a promise of future cash. He wrote a report detailing hallucinations. I never had violent episodes that never occurred, and a cognitive decline that was pure fiction. He used the trust I had placed in him during my wife's dying days to construct a cage for me. The blow landed the next morning while I was shaving. There was a knock at the door of my suite. I expected room service. Instead, I found a process server. He handed me a thick envelope and walked away without a word. I opened it standing there in my robe. It was a court order, an emergency ex parte guardianship petition granted by a judge who had seen the signature of a respected doctor and panicked. The words swam before my eyes: immediate freezing of all assets, temporary suspension of financial autonomy, pending a competency hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I reached for my wallet. I pulled out my black card, the one I had used to humiliate Veronica just days before in my imagination, or rather the one I used to secure this room. I called the automated number. Declined. Account status: frozen by court order. I tried my business account. Frozen. I tried my personal savings. Frozen. Even the trust fund I had set up for my potential grandchildren was locked down. I was a multimillionaire who could not buy a pack of gum. I had $20,000 in cash in the safe minus what I had spent on the hotel and JT. That was it. That was my war chest. If I ran out of that, I was destitute. I called Henderson. His voice was tight with stress. "Winston, this is bad," he said. "This is very bad. The judge is old school. He sees a report from your wife's doctor saying you are mentally unstable, and he defaults to protection mode. He froze everything to stop you from squandering the estate." "Squandering," I shouted. "It is my money." "To the court, it is now a protected asset," Henderson explained, "and you are the liability." Bryce played this perfectly. He didn't sue you. He petitioned to save you. He is painting himself as the concerned son-in-law, trying to stop a senile old man from burning through the family inheritance in a grief-stricken manic episode. "And the hotel," I asked. "The hotel will kick you out the moment your card bounces on the daily hold," Henderson said. "You have maybe 24 hours before they realize the credit line is dead, and if we lose tomorrow—" Henderson paused. "If we lose tomorrow, Winston, the court appoints a temporary guardian, usually a family member. Bryce and Tiana will have legal control over your person and your property. They will have the power to place you in a facility for your own safety. They will have the power to liquidate assets to pay for your care. They will put me in a home and sell my house," I said, my voice cold. "Yes," Henderson said. "And once you are in the system, getting out is a nightmare. It could take years to prove your competency. By then, the money will be gone." I hung up the phone. I walked to the window. The city looked different now. It didn't look like a playground. It looked like a prison. I felt a flicker of genuine fear. Not for my life, but for my freedom. I had underestimated them. I thought they were just greedy. I didn't realize they were willing to enslave me. I looked at the safe where my cash was hidden. That paper money was the only thing standing between me and total oblivion. I called JT. "Get over here," I said. "Bring everything you have on Dr. Coburn." JT arrived an hour later with 2 pizzas and a box of files. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He knew. We were soldiers again, sitting in a bunker waiting for the enemy to breach the line. "This doctor is dirty," JT said, throwing a file onto the coffee table. "But proving it in 12 hours is going to be tough." He covers his tracks. "No malpractice suits, no obvious criminal record. Everyone has a vice." JT, I said, pacing the room. "Bryce found him. Bryce bonded with him. That means they share a vice. Bryce is a gambler." JT nodded slowly. "Birds of a feather. Check the underground poker clubs," I said. "Check the bookies. Check the places where a man goes when he wants to lose money he doesn't have. Bryce didn't meet this doctor at a medical conference. He met him in the dark. We spent the night digging. We hacked databases. We called in favors from old contacts on the Vice squad. We drank coffee until our hands shook. The clock ticked down. 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I was staring at a spreadsheet of Coburn's known associates when JT made a noise. A low grunt of satisfaction. "Got him," JT whispered. He turned his laptop toward me. It wasn't a gambling debt. It was worse, or rather better for us. Dr. Coburn had a second family, a mistress and 2 kids in a condo 3 towns over. A condo he paid for in cash every month. Cash that didn't show up on his tax returns. Cash that matched almost exactly the withdrawals from a pharmacy account he managed. He is running a pill mill, I realized, looking at the numbers. He is selling prescriptions for opioids off the books to fund his double life. And Bryce knows, JT said. That is the leverage. Bryce probably bought pills from him or met him through a dealer. That is how he got the signature. Blackmail or a partnership. "It doesn't matter," I said, standing up. "What matters is that I have the proof." I looked at the clock, 6 a.m. The hearing was in 3 hours. I was tired. My eyes burned. My suit was rumpled. But I felt a surge of energy. "I am going to destroy him," I said. JT looked at me. "We need to get this to the judge." "No," I said. "If we give it to the judge now, they might delay the hearing. They might ask for an investigation. That buys them time. I want to do this in the courtroom. I want to see Coburn's face when I reveal that I know about the condo. I want to see Bryce's face when his star witness crumbles." I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at the old man in the mirror. They said I was crazy. They said I was weak. They said I was a child who needed a guardian. I dried my face. I put on my hat. I grabbed the file containing Coburn's life and the recording of Bryce conspiring to drive me mad. "Let us go to court," I said to JT. "I think it is time the judge met the real Winston." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old lies. It was a small room devoid of windows, filled with a heavy silence that pressed against my eardrums. I sat at the defense table, my hands folded on the polished wood, watching the performance of a lifetime. Bryce stood at the podium, his shoulders slumped in a posture of practiced defeat. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him, a calculated choice to make him look smaller, more vulnerable. He held a handkerchief in one hand, dabbling at dry eyes as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we love him." Bryce choked out, his voice trembling with an emotion that looked real from the bench but felt like slime from where I sat. "We just want him safe." He disappeared from his wife's funeral. He wandered into the city confused and disoriented. When we finally tracked him down, he had checked into the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton. He is spending thousands of dollars a night, Your Honor. Money he needs for his care. He thinks he is a millionaire. He is hallucinating wealth. It is a classic manic episode triggered by grief. We just want to bring him home. We want to make sure he doesn't end up destitute on the street. He paused to wipe his nose. It was masterful. He painted me as a tragic figure, a senile old man burning through his life savings in a fever dream while his loving family tried desperately to save him. I looked at Tiana. She was sitting in the front row behind Bryce. Her head was bowed, her eyes fixed on her lap. She was nodding slowly along with his lies. She knew the truth. She knew I had the money. She knew I was sane, but she sat there and let her husband dismantle my life because she was too weak to stop him. She was trading her father's freedom for a quiet life with a liar. Seeing her nod was worse than hearing Bryce speak. It was the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. Judge Vance, a stern man with gray hair and a face carved from granite, looked down at Bryce with evident sympathy. He shuffled the papers on his desk, the fake medical report from Dr. Coburn sitting right on top. "This report describes a rapid cognitive decline," the judge said, his voice echoing in the room. "Dr. Coburn states that Mr. Winston is a danger to his own financial well-being." "Yes, Your Honor," Bryce said, sniffing. "We tried to handle it privately, but when he started throwing money away, we had no choice. We are asking for temporary guardianship just to freeze the assets and get him into a facility where he can be monitored. The judge nodded slowly, turning his gaze toward me. His eyes were not unkind, but they were pitying. He saw exactly what Bryce wanted him to see. An old black man in a nice suit who had lost his grip on reality. "Mr. Winston," the judge said, "do you have anything to say before I rule on this petition?" The air in the room grew thin. I could feel the walls closing in. If I spoke and sounded angry, I would look unstable. If I stayed silent, I looked compliant. Bryce turned to look at me, a tiny smirk playing at the corner of his mouth hidden from the judge. He thought he had won. He thought I was trapped in the box he had built. I stood up. I did not rush. I used the table for leverage and rose to my full height. I buttoned my jacket. I adjusted my cuffs. I did not shake. I did not tremble. I looked at the judge with the same steady gaze I used to inspect the structural integrity of a tunnel before sending my men inside. "Your Honor," I said, my voice deep and clear, filling the room without shouting. "I am not here to beg for my freedom. I am here to show you why this man is trying to steal it." The judge frowned. "Mr. Winston, this is a competency hearing, not a criminal trial. It is about to be both," I said. I gestured to Robert Henderson, who had been sitting silently beside me waiting for my signal. Robert stood up. He didn't look like a family lawyer today. He looked like a prosecutor. He held a flash drive in his hand like a weapon. "Your Honor," Henderson said, "before you make a decision that strips a citizen of his civil rights based on the word of a son-in-law with a gambling addiction and a doctor who runs a pill mill, I suggest you look at this." "Gambling addiction," Bryce sputtered, his fake tears vanishing instantly. "That is slander." Henderson ignored him. He plugged the drive into the court's presentation system. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. Exhibit A, Henderson stated. This video was taken 2 nights ago, the night Mr. Winston was allegedly wandering the streets in a fugue state. The video played. It was the footage JT had pulled from the Rivers Casino security feed. It showed Bryce sitting at a blackjack table. He looked manic, sweating, pulling chips from his pocket. He wasn't grieving. He wasn't looking for me. He was betting $500 a hand. The timestamp is clearly visible, Henderson narrated. While he claims he was searching for his father-in-law, he was actually losing $4,000 in 3 hours. Bryce went pale. Tiana gasped, covering her mouth. Exhibit B. Henderson continued clicking a button. The audio recording from my kitchen filled the courtroom. It was grainy but audible. It was the voice of Bryce talking to Tiana the night after the funeral. "We just need to get the old man out of the way," the recording played. "He is useless. Just a senile old black man taking up space. Once we put him in the home, the house is ours. We sell it, we pay the bookie, and we are free. He won't last a year in there anyway. He is halfway dead already." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. The judge's face hardened. The pity vanished, replaced by a cold shock. The racial slur hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. I saw Tiana shrink into herself, tears now streaming down her face for real. She had heard him say it, but hearing it played back in a court of law stripped away her denial. Her husband didn't care about her father. He despised him. "That is out of context," Bryce shouted, panic rising in his voice. "That is a manipulated recording. Sit down, Mr. Miller." The judge barked, his voice like a gavel strike. Henderson wasn't done. "Exhibit C," he said, pulling up a document on the screen. "This is the disciplinary record of Dr. Coburn, the man who signed the affidavit of incompetence. He is currently under investigation by the medical board for overprescribing opioids. And here is a bank transfer record showing a cash deposit of $5,000 into his personal account the day after he signed this report. We are still tracing the source, but I think we can all guess where it came from." Henderson closed the laptop. "Your Honor, this is not a guardianship case," he said. "This is a conspiracy to commit fraud. This is an attempt to utilize this court as a weapon to imprison a man solely to access his assets to pay off gambling debts. Mr. Winston is not incompetent. He is a retired contractor with a net worth in the millions who simply refuses to let his son-in-law rob him blind." I watched Bryce. He was trembling now, really trembling. He looked at the judge, then at Tiana, then at the door. He realized the cage he had built for me had a door that locked from the outside, and he was the one inside it. The judge looked at the evidence, then at Bryce. The disgust on his face was palpable. He picked up the file containing Dr. Coburn's report and dropped it into the trash can beside his desk. It made a loud final thud. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice, the judge said, his voice low and dangerous. The temporary freeze on Mr. Winston's assets is lifted effective immediately. He leaned forward, staring directly at Bryce. Mr. Miller, you came into my courtroom and lied to my face. You wasted the court's time and resources to facilitate a theft. You attempted to strip a man of his dignity and his rights for your own gain. But, Your Honor, Bryce stammered. Silence, the judge roared. I am not finished. Bailiff, detain Mr. Miller. Bryce's eyes went wide. Detain me! For what? For perjury, the judge said. And I am referring this entire file to the district attorney's office. I want an immediate investigation into elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy. If half of what I just saw is true, you are not going home to your wife tonight. Two bailiffs moved toward Bryce. He backed away, looking at Tiana. Tiana, do something, tell him. Tiana didn't move. She sat frozen, staring at the screen where the video of him gambling had played. She looked at me. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I didn't look away. I didn't offer her a smile. I let her see the man she had tried to bury. I turned to the judge. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge nodded at me, a look of apology in his eyes. Mr. Winston, I am sorry you had to go through this. You are free to go. I picked up my hat. I watched as the bailiffs clicked handcuffs onto Bryce's wrists. He was screaming now, shouting about his rights, shouting that it was all a mistake. But nobody was listening. I walked out of the courtroom, my head held high. Henderson walked beside me, packing his briefcase. That went well, he said dryly. It is not over, I said. This was just the defense. Now we go on the offense. I walked past Tiana, who was still sitting in the bench alone. She looked small and broken. Dad, she whispered as I passed. I didn't stop. I kept walking toward the exit. The air in the hallway was cool and fresh. I took a deep breath. I had my money back. I had my freedom back. But I still had a house to reclaim. And I had a feeling the hardest part was yet to come. Bryce walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun, but he did not look like a free man. He looked like a ghost. The judge had released him on his own recognizance, pending the full investigation, mostly because the county jail was overcrowded and Bryce had no prior violent record, but the swagger was gone. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his eyes darted around the plaza nervously. He had walked in hoping to steal my freedom, and he had walked out stripping himself of his dignity. He had $0 in his bank account, zero credibility, and zero friends. But he still had one very big problem. As he descended the concrete steps, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a taxi. It wasn't Tiana coming to pick him up because Tiana didn't have a car with gas or insurance anymore. Two men stepped out. They were thick-necked, wearing leather jackets despite the heat. I recognized the type from my days working construction in the rougher parts of the city. They were collectors, not the kind who send letters, the kind who break thumbs. I watched from the window of Henderson's office across the street. Bryce stopped dead in his tracks. He tried to turn back toward the safety of the courthouse, but one of the men moved faster, blocking his path. They didn't hit him. They didn't make a scene. One of them simply placed a hand on Bryce's chest and leaned in close. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language perfectly. It was the universal language of a debt coming due. Bryce was shaking his head, pleading, showing his empty palms. The man poked him in the chest once, twice, 3 times. Then he pointed a finger at Bryce's face, a final warning. They got back in the car and drove away, leaving my son-in-law shivering in the warm air. He owed $50,000 to people who didn't care about court orders or family drama, and the clock had just run out. That night I was sitting in my hotel room organizing the paperwork for the trust fund when my phone rang. It was Tiana. I almost didn't answer. I was done with her lies and her manipulations. But something about the ringtone felt urgent. It rang and rang and rang. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. Daddy, help us. Her voice was a scream, a raw, terrified sound that scraped against my ear. She wasn't crying. She was hyperventilating. Daddy, they are here. They are outside. Slow down, Tiana, I said, sitting up straighter. Who is there? Men, she shrieked. Men with baseball bats. They are banging on the front door. They are shouting Bryce's name. They said they are going to kill him, Daddy. They said they are going to burn the house down. Bryce is hiding in the closet. He is crying. He won't come out. Please, Daddy, you have to help us. They are going to break in. I could hear the thudding in the background. Heavy rhythmic blows against the solid oak door I had installed myself to keep my family safe. I could hear muffled shouting, deep angry voices demanding payment. The house was dark because I had cut the power, so Tiana was huddled in the blackness listening to the wolves scratching at the entrance. Please, Daddy, she begged. Pay them. Just pay them whatever they want. I know you have the money. Transfer it to Bryce's account right now so he can show them on his phone. Please, I don't want to die. My hand tightened around the phone. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was my daughter, my flesh and blood. She was terrified. She was in danger. Every instinct I had as a father screamed at me to save her. It would be so easy. I could make a call. I could wire the funds. I could make the monsters go away with the stroke of a pen. I had the power to be the hero. But then I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me cold and sharp. I saw the rain falling on Beatrice's casket. I felt the hand on my shoulder. I heard Bryce's whisper, "Pack your things and never come back." I saw Tiana looking at her shoes, refusing to meet my eyes while her husband threw me into the street. They hadn't cared if I had a place to sleep. They hadn't cared if I had food. They had left me to the elements. And now that the elements were at their door, they wanted me to be the umbrella. If I paid these men, I would not be saving Tiana. I would be enabling Bryce. I would be teaching them that no matter what they did, no matter how much they stole or how badly they treated me, I would always be there to clean up their mess. I would be buying their safety, but I would be selling my self-respect, and Bryce would never learn. He would gamble again, he would steal again, and next time, the debt would be higher and the danger would be worse. "Daddy, please," she screamed, and I heard the sound of glass breaking in the distance. I opened my eyes. The indecision was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Call 911, Tiana." I said, my voice steady. "What?" she gasped. "No, we can't call the police. These are bad men. Bryce says if we call the cops, they will come back and kill us later. You have to pay them." "I am not paying them, Tiana," I said. "I am not paying for your husband's mistakes. I am your father, not an ATM." "But Daddy," she wailed. "Call the police," I repeated. "Or don't. It is your choice." "But I am hanging up now." "No, Daddy, wait." I ended the call. I stared at the phone for a second, my hand shaking slightly. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, to hear my child beg and to say no. It went against nature. But sometimes nature needs to take its course. I grabbed my coat and my car keys. I wasn't going to pay the debt. I wasn't going to stop the lesson. But I was still a father. I left the hotel and got into my rental car. I drove fast, ignoring the speed limits, heading toward the neighborhood where I had lived for 20 years. I didn't pull into the driveway. I didn't turn on my headlights. I parked a block away under the shadow of a large elm tree where I had a clear view of the house. It was pitch black. The streetlights were the only illumination. I saw the black sedan parked on the lawn. I saw two shadows swinging bats at the front door. They were shouting, cursing, throwing rocks at the upstairs windows. I sat there in the dark, watching. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I watched the terror unfold. I waited. I needed Tiana to feel this. I needed her to understand that Bryce couldn't protect her. I needed her to see that the man she chose over me was a coward hiding in a closet while thugs threatened his wife. I waited for 2 agonizing minutes. Then finally I saw the blue lights in the distance. Tiana had called the police. The thugs saw the lights too. They dropped their bats, ran to their car, and peeled away tires, screeching just seconds before the squad car pulled up. I watched the officers approach the house with flashlights. I watched the door open slowly. I saw Tiana run out sobbing into the arms of a police officer. I saw Bryce stumble out behind her, pale and shaking, looking like a beaten dog. They were safe physically, but psychologically they were shattered. Tiana looked around wildly, probably hoping to see me, hoping I had come to the rescue. But she didn't see me. I was just a shadow in the distance, watching her learn the hardest lesson of her life. I put the car in gear and drove away before they could spot me. I hadn't saved them from the fear. I had let them taste it. And as I drove back to the city, I knew that tonight was the beginning of the end for her marriage. She would never forget that while she was facing the wolves, her husband was hiding. and her father had forced her to stand on her own 2 feet. The morning sun illuminated a scene of absolute desperation inside the house I had built with my own hands. The front door, which had been battered by baseball bats the night before, was wide open. A large white moving truck was parked crookedly on the lawn, tearing up the grass I had watered for 20 years. 2 men in greasy coveralls were hauling furniture out of the living room, not with care, but with the rough haste of people who get paid by the hour to clear out debris. I stood on the sidewalk watching them carry out the dining room table. It was not just a table. It was a solid oak masterpiece I had crafted myself in 1998. I had selected the wood. I had planed it, sanded it, and varnished it until it glowed like amber. Beatrice and I had eaten thousands of meals at that table. We had blown out birthday candles on it. We had helped Tiana with her calculus homework on it, and now Bryce was selling it for scraps. I could hear him inside shouting orders. "Take the sofa too," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "And the china cabinet. I don't care if it is heavy, just get it on the truck. I need the cash in hand before noon." He was liquidating my life. He was stripping the house to the studs to pay the $50,000 he owed to the sharks who had visited last night. He knew he couldn't sell the house because of the life estate clause I had triggered, so he was selling everything inside it instead. He was selling my history to save his skin. Tiana was sitting on the front steps, her head in her hands. She looked defeated. She wasn't stopping him. She wasn't protecting her mother's things. She was letting him cannibalize our home because she was too terrified to stand up to him. She saw me standing on the sidewalk, but she didn't say a word. She just looked at me with hollow eyes and looked away. That was the final straw. I turned to the 2 police officers standing behind me. One was the sheriff himself, a man named Miller who had known me since I laid the pipes for the new precinct building. "It is time, Sheriff," I said. We walked up the driveway. The movers stopped holding the table halfway out the door when they saw the badges. Bryce came running out of the hallway holding Beatrice's silver tea set. "What is going on?" he demanded, freezing when he saw the uniforms. "You can't be here. This is private property. Officer, remove this man. He is harassing us." I walked past him up the steps and placed my hand on the oak table. "Put it back," I told the movers. "Excuse me," Bryce shouted, stepping between me and the workers. "You do not give orders here, Winston. This is my house. These are my things. I am selling them because I have debts to pay thanks to you cutting us off." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Actually, Mr. Miller, that is not entirely accurate." Bryce looked from the sheriff to me, his eyes darting nervously. "What are you talking about? The house is in Tiana's name. We have the deed. We can sell whatever we want inside it." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a blue folder. It wasn't the deed. It was something much more powerful. It was the original trust agreement dated 20 years ago. "You have a deed," I said, my voice calm and cold. "But you never bothered to read the encumbrances, did you, Bryce? You never bothered to do a title search because you were too busy counting money you hadn't earned." I opened the folder and held up the document. "This house was never a gift," I said, looking at Tiana, who had stood up and was watching with trembling lips. "It was a conditional transfer into the Winston and Beatrice family trust. Tiana is the beneficiary, yes, but she is not the owner. The trust owns the house, and the trust has strict conditions." I turned the page and pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "Condition 14, Section B," I read aloud. "The beneficiary, Tiana Miller, retains the right of occupancy solely and exclusively on the condition that she provides care, shelter, and maintenance for the grantors Winston and Beatrice until their deaths. Failure to provide said care or any act that displaces the grantors from the residence constitutes a material breach of the trust." I looked up. Bryce was pale. Tiana had her hand over her mouth. "A material breach," I continued, "results in the immediate and automatic revocation of the beneficiary's status. The property reverts entirely to the surviving grantor." I snapped the folder shut. "The moment you told me to pack my bags and leave," I said, staring Bryce down, "you violated the trust. The moment you changed the locks, you broke the contract. The moment you tried to put me in a nursing home, you signed your own eviction notice." "This house does not belong to Tiana," I said, my voice rising. "And it certainly does not belong to you. It belongs to me. It has belonged to me since the second you kicked me out at the cemetery." Bryce shook his head, backing away. "That is legal mumbo-jumbo. You can't just take the house back. We have lived here for 10 years. We have rights. Squatters' rights." "You have no rights," Sheriff Miller interrupted, stepping closer to Bryce. "I have reviewed the documents with the district attorney this morning, Mr. Miller. The revocation is valid. The title has already been updated at the county clerk's office as of 9 a.m. today. Mr. Winston is the sole legal owner of this property." The sheriff turned to the movers. "Gentlemen," he said, "if you take that table, you are in possession of stolen property. I suggest you put it back exactly where you found it and leave." The movers didn't hesitate. They carried the table back inside faster than they had brought it out. They got in their truck and drove away, leaving the back ramp hanging open in their haste. Bryce stood there clutching my wife's tea set, looking like a child who had been caught stealing candy. "This is insane," he screamed, his face turning red. "Tiana, tell them it is your house." Tiana looked at me. "Dad," she whispered, "you tricked me. You gave me the house, but you kept it. You never trusted me." "I trusted you to take care of me," I said, feeling the weight of the sadness in my chest. "I trusted you to be a daughter. I put that clause in there to protect you from yourself, to protect you from men like him who would strip you bare. And I was right. Look at him, Tiana. He is selling your mother's table to pay a bookie. If I hadn't kept the house, he would have sold the roof over your head next week." She looked at Bryce. She looked at the tea set in his hands. The realization was dawning on her, but it was too late. "So what happens now?" Bryce sneered, trying to regain some ground. "You going to kick us out? You going to throw your own daughter on the street?" I looked at the house. My house. I looked at the man who had desecrated my wife's memory. "You are trespassing," I said. Bryce laughed a high, nervous sound. "Trespassing. We live here, old man. You have to give us 30 days. You have to file an eviction notice. You have to go through the courts." Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Miller, since the ownership reverted due to a breach of trust, and since you never had a lease agreement, you are not tenants. You are unauthorized occupants, and Mr. Winston has declined to grant you permission to stay." I looked Bryce dead in the eye. "You gave me until sunset," I said. "I am giving you 5 minutes." 5 minutes, Bryce shouted. "That is impossible. We have clothes. We have furniture." "You have nothing," I corrected him. "The furniture belongs to the house. The clothes you can take if you can carry them. But anything you cannot carry stays." I checked my watch. 4 minutes, I said. Bryce looked ready to attack me. His fists clenched, his eyes bulged. But the sheriff's hand was resting on his taser. Tiana grabbed Bryce's arm. "Bryce, let us go. Just let us go." "No," Bryce roared, shaking her off. "This is my house. I am not leaving." I turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff, I would like to report 2 intruders in my home. They are refusing to leave. I feel threatened. Please remove them." Sheriff Miller nodded. "Bryce Miller." "Tiana Miller, you are under arrest for criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent." Bryce S. Jaw dropped. "You are arresting us. Only if you don't start walking," the sheriff said, pointing to the street. "Right now." Tiana let out a sob and ran into the house. She came back out 30 seconds later, clutching her purse and a jacket. She didn't look at me. She walked past me, her head down, shame radiating off her in waves. Bryce stood his ground for a second longer. He looked at the house. He looked at the luxury he thought he owned. He looked at the future he had gambled away. Then he looked at me. "You will pay for this, Winston," he spat. "You will die alone in this big, empty house." I stepped closer to him until I could smell the fear sweating off him. "I may die alone, Bryce," I said softly, "but I will die in my own home. And I will die with my dignity. You are going to die in a cell." He threw the silver tea set onto the grass, denting the pot, and stormed down the driveway. I watched them go. I watched them walk down the street I had paved away from the house I had built. They had nothing. No car, no money, no home. I walked up the steps and picked up the tea set. I wiped the dirt off the silver. I walked inside my house. It was hot and silent. It smelled of despair and bad decisions. But as I placed the tea set back on the cabinet, I felt the house take a breath. The parasite was gone. The infection had been cut out. I was alone. But I was the master of my domain once again. The piece of paper Sheriff Miller handed to Bryce was not a suggestion. It was a court-ordered mandate for immediate removal. The legal language was dense, but the sheriff's translation was crystal clear. You are no longer residents of this address. You are unauthorized occupants. You have exactly 5 minutes to vacate the premises before you are physically removed. I watched the color drain from Bryce's face. It was a fascinating transformation. For years he had walked through these halls with the arrogance of a king. He had treated me like a servant in my own home. He had looked at these walls and seen dollar signs. Now he looked at the paper trembling in his hands and he saw the end of his world. Tiana was paralyzed. She stood near the doorway clutching a designer handbag that I knew I had paid for. Her eyes darted between her husband and me. She was waiting for someone to fix this. She was waiting for me to step in and say it was all a harsh lesson and that they could stay. She was waiting for the safety net she had abused for decades. But I stayed silent. I stood on the porch steps, my arms crossed over my chest, looking down at them. The heat of the day was rising, but inside me there was only ice. "Time is ticking," Bryce the sheriff said, tapping his watch. "I suggest you grab your keys and start walking." "We have rights," Bryce sputtered, his voice high and thin. "You cannot just throw us out on the street. We have nowhere to go." "That is not my problem," the sheriff replied. "And frankly, considering what you tried to do to Mr. Winston, I think the street is too good for you." Bryce looked at the moving truck that was pulling away. He looked at the empty space where the dining table had been. He realized he had no furniture to take, even if he had a place to put it. He had sold it all. He had burned the bridge and the boat. 3 minutes, the sheriff warned. Something inside Bryce snapped. I saw it happen. His eyes changed. The fear evaporated and was replaced by a pure, unadulterated hatred. He crumpled the eviction notice in his fist and threw it on the ground. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the monster my daughter had married without his mask. "This is your fault," he screamed. "You sick old man. This is all your fault. You set me up. You let me think the house was ours. You let me think you were just a broke mechanic. You lied to us." "I didn't lie." "Bryce," I said calmly. "You never asked. You assumed I was nothing because it suited your narrative. You are nothing." He roared, stepping forward. "You are just a lucky old man. You stumbled into money you didn't deserve. You should have died. Do you hear me? You should have died in that hospital instead of Beatrice. At least she had the decency to leave us alone. You are just a leech holding on to wealth you can't even use. You are supposed to be dead so we can live." The words hung in the heavy air, ugly and raw. Tiana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sheriff Miller's hand dropped to his holster. But Bryce wasn't finished. He was vibrating with rage, a man who had lost everything and needed to destroy the source of his pain. "You ruined my life," he shouted, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "I owe people money, Winston. Dangerous people. If I don't pay them, they are going to kill me. And it is on you. My blood is on your hands. Your debts are your own." "Bryce," I said, not moving an inch. "You dug the hole. Now lie in it." He let out a guttural sound, a mix of a scream and a sob. He looked at me standing there calm and untouchable, and it broke him. He lowered his shoulder and charged. He ran up the porch steps, his fists clenched, his eyes focused on my throat. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence me. He wanted to beat the life out of the man who had outsmarted him. I didn't move. I didn't raise my hands to defend myself. I didn't even blink. I just watched him come. Because I knew who was standing in the shadow of the doorway behind me. JT had been my friend for 40 years, but before that he had been a recon Marine. He was 70 years old, but he was made of iron and reflexes. He stepped out of the shadow just as Bryce reached the top step. He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He simply extended a leg and used Bryce's own momentum against him. Bryce hit the floor of the porch with a sickening thud. Before he could scramble up, JT had his knee in the center of Bryce's back and his arm twisted behind him at a painful angle. "Stay down, son," JT said, his voice calm and gravelly. "You do not want to make this worse." Bryce screamed in pain and frustration, thrashing against the weight of the older man. "Get off me! Let me go!" Sheriff Miller was there in a second. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt and clicked them onto Bryce's wrists. "Bryce Miller, you are under arrest for assault and battery," the sheriff said, hauling him to his feet. "And add attempted injury to an elderly person to that list. You just bought yourself a felony, son." Bryce looked wild. He looked at me, his eyes pleading now. "Winston, tell them. Tell them I tripped. Don't let them take me. I can't go to jail. Vinny S. guys will find me in there." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown my wife's memories into a garbage can. I looked at the man who had called me a burden. "You didn't trip Bryce," I said. "You attacked me, and now you are going to face the consequences." The sheriff dragged him toward the squad car. Bryce was weeping now, loud, ugly sobs that echoed down the quiet street. He was begging. He was bargaining. He was calling for Tiana. But Tiana didn't move. She stood on the lawn, her hands empty, her face pale as a sheet. She watched her husband being shoved into the back of a police car. She watched her future disappear in a flash of blue lights. When the squad car drove away, leaving only silence in its wake, she slowly turned to look at me. She looked like a child who had lost her parents in a crowd. She looked small and terrified. "Daddy?" she whispered. I looked down at her from the porch of my house. My house. "Daddy, what am I going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He is gone. They took him. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. I have no car." I looked at her. I felt a pang of pity deep in my chest. It was the instinct of a father wanting to shield his child from the rain. But then I remembered the phone call. I remembered her accusing me of killing her mother. I remembered her silence when Bryce kicked me out. I remembered that she had watched him sell my table and said nothing. If I saved her now, she would never learn. If I opened the door, she would never grow. She would just find another Bryce, another crutch, another way to remain weak. "You are going to figure it out, Tiana," I said, my voice heavy with sadness but firm as steel. "But I can't," she cried, taking a step toward the stairs. "I can't do it alone. Let me come inside." "Please, Daddy, I will leave him. I will divorce him. Just let me come home." I shook my head slowly. "You had a home, Tiana," I said. "You had a father who would have died for you. You had a mother who loved you more than life, and you traded it all for him. You chose him, Tiana. You stood by him when he mocked me. You stood by him when he robbed me. You stood by him when he tried to put me in a home." I pointed down the street in the direction the police car had gone. "You made your choice. You chose your husband over your parents. Now go follow him." "Daddy, please," she wailed, falling to her knees on the grass. I turned around. I walked into the house. I closed the solid oak door. I heard her scream my name one last time, a sound of pure heartbreak. I locked the deadbolt. I engaged the chain. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and listened. I listened to her weeping on the lawn. I listened until the sobs turned into silence, and then until I heard the sound of footsteps walking slowly away down the driveway. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. It hurt more than the funeral. It hurt more than the betrayal. But as I stood there in the quiet of my reclaimed home, I knew it was the only act of love I had left to give. I had to let her fall so she could learn how to stand up. 30 days is a long time when you are sitting in a jail cell, but it is an eternity when you are living in a motel room that charges by the hour. Bryce was gone. The judge had denied his bail after learning about his flight risk and the threats from his creditors. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, sleeping on a steel cot, and learning exactly what happens to men who think they are smarter than the system. But Tiana faced a different kind of prison. She was free, but she was destitute. I did not have to guess what her life looked like. JT kept tabs on her, not to control her, but because I needed to know if she would sink or swim. He told me she was living in the Starlight Motel, a place on the edge of town where the neon sign buzzed all night and the carpets were sticky. She had sold her designer purses to pay for the first week. When that money ran out, she had to find a job. For a woman who had once complained that the water pressure in her free house wasn't high enough, reality hit hard. No office would hire her without a reference. No retail store wanted someone with no experience who looked down her nose at customers. So she ended up at a greasy spoon diner washing dishes. My daughter, who used to get manicures weekly, now had hands red and chapped from hot water and cheap detergent. She was scrubbing the grease off other people's plates to earn enough for a sandwich. She was tasting the poverty she had mocked her entire life. I was back at work, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the noise. I had taken a consulting job on a new high-rise project downtown. I missed the smell of concrete and the sound of jackhammers. I was standing on the edge of the site wearing my hard hat and holding a set of blueprints when I saw her. She was standing by the chain-link fence watching me. She looked 10 years older. Her clothes were clean but worn, probably bought from a thrift store. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun and she wore no makeup. She didn't wave. She just stood there gripping the fence with raw fingers. I walked over slowly. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just waited. "Hello, Daddy," she said, her voice barely audible over the construction noise. "Hello, Tiana." She looked at the busy site, at the men working at the steel beams rising into the sky. "I didn't know you were working," she said. "I never stopped working, Tiana," I replied. "You just stopped noticing." She flinched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. It was dirty, stained with something dark, maybe grease, maybe coffee. She held it out to me through the gap in the fence. "I came to give you this," she said. I took the pouch. I opened it. Inside was a gold band with 3 small diamonds, Beatrice's wedding ring. It was the one thing Tiana had managed to sneak out of the house before the eviction. I thought she would have pawned it weeks ago. I thought she would have traded her mother's memory for a bus ticket or a hotel upgrade. "I almost sold it," she said, reading my mind. "I was standing in the pawn shop, Daddy. The man offered me $200. I was hungry. I haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days. But then I looked at it. I looked at the inscription inside, Forever B and W, and I couldn't do it. I realized that if I sold that ring, I would be exactly what you said I was. I would be empty. I closed my fist around the ring. I felt the metal bite into my palm. "So you brought it back," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "I stole it. I shouldn't have taken it. It belongs to you." "I am sorry, Daddy. I am sorry for everything. I am sorry I let him treat you like that. I am sorry I didn't defend you. I am sorry I forgot who raised me." She looked down at her shoes, cheap sneakers that were falling apart. "I am not asking for money," she said quickly, looking back up. "I know you won't give it to me, and I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to have this back before I lost the courage to do the right thing." I looked at my daughter. I saw the dark circles under her eyes. I saw the hunger in her hollow cheeks. I saw the shame that hung over her like a shroud. But for the first time in years, I also saw something else. I saw a spark of dignity. She hadn't come to beg. She hadn't come to manipulate. She had come to make restitution. My hand moved toward my pocket where my checkbook was. It was a reflex. The instinct to save her, to write a check that would get her a nice apartment and a warm meal, was overwhelming. I could end her suffering in 10 seconds. I had millions. What was a few thousand to me? But I stopped myself. If I saved her now, I would kill the woman she was becoming. If I pulled her out of the fire, she would never learn to handle the heat. She needed to know she could survive on her own. She needed to know that her value didn't come from my bank account. I put the ring in my pocket. "Thank you, Tiana," I said. "This means a lot to me." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Okay. Well, goodbye, Daddy." She turned to walk away, back to the bus stop, back to the diner, back to the struggle. "Wait," I called out. She stopped and turned, hope flickering in her eyes. I reached into my back pocket. I didn't pull out money. I pulled out a folded piece of paper I had been carrying for a week, just in case this moment ever came. I walked to the fence and handed it to her. She took it, looking confused. "What is this?" "It is a schedule," I said. "For the community college. They have a nursing program, Tiana. It is a 2-year degree. It is hard work, long hours, lots of studying. But they have a grant program for low-income students. It covers tuition and books. You qualify now." She looked at the paper, then at me. "Nursing. You accused me of letting your mother die," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You said I didn't care. If you want to honor her memory, don't just cry about it. Go learn how to save lives. Go learn what it actually takes to care for people when they are sick and dying. Go do something useful with your hands instead of waiting for someone to fill them with cash." She stared at the schedule. Her hands were trembling. "I am not going to give you a dime, Tiana," I said firmly. "I am not going to pay your rent. I am not going to buy you a car. You are going to keep washing dishes. You are going to take the bus. You are going to study at night when you are exhausted. You are going to struggle." I leaned closer to the fence. "But if you do this," I said, "if you stick with it, if you pass your exams and get your license, if you stand on that stage in 2 years and accept that diploma knowing you earned it, I will be there. I will be in the front row, and I will cheer louder than anyone else." She looked at me, and then she burst into tears. Not the fake tears she used to use to get a new purse. These were tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears of a child who finally understood what her father was trying to teach her. She nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. "I will do it, Daddy," she sobbed. "I promise. I will do it. I believe you," I said. "And Tiana, Yes. Dump him. Divorce him. He is an anchor and you need to swim. She nodded again. I already filed the papers, she said. I used my first paycheck from the diner to pay the filing fee. He is gone, Daddy. Good, I said. Now go. You have a shift to work. She clutched the paper to her chest like it was a winning lottery ticket. She turned and walked away, her step a little lighter, her back a little straighter. I watched her go until she disappeared around the corner. I touched the pocket where Beatrice's ring sat. I hadn't given her money. I hadn't given her a house. I had given her something much more valuable. I had given her a chance to respect herself. I put my hard hat back on and turned back to the construction site. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the steel and concrete. I was 73 years old. I was alone. But as I looked at the skyline, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I had built many things in my life: bridges, tunnels, foundations. But watching my daughter walk away to fight her own battles, I knew that this might be the most important thing I had ever built. I was rebuilding my family one hard lesson at a time. It took exactly 12 months to scrub the stain of betrayal from the walls of the house on Maple Street. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, listening to the echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors I had laid down 20 years ago. The ghost of Bryce's greed was gone. The shadow of Tiana's weakness had faded, but the house still felt heavy. It was a museum of a life that no longer existed, and I was tired of being the curator. So I sold it. I did not sell it to a flipper or a shark. I sold it to a young couple with a baby on the way who looked at the kitchen and saw a future instead of a paycheck. When the check cleared, I did not put the money in the offshore account. I did not buy a yacht. I bought an old abandoned warehouse 3 blocks from the neighborhood where I grew up. It had broken windows and a leaking roof, but the bones were good. I called in every favor I was owed. I hired my old crew, and we built the Winston and Beatrice Skills Center. Today, the warehouse is full of noise. The sound of saws cutting wood, the hiss of welding torches, the hum of sewing machines. I walk the floor every morning watching young men and women from the neighborhood learning how to work with their hands. These are kids who the world gave up on, kids who were told they were nothing. I teach them plumbing. I teach them how to read a blueprint. I teach them that there is dignity in sweat and honor in a callus. I look at their faces focused and determined, and I see the son I wish I had raised. I see the future I am building with my own 2 hands. I am not hoarding my wealth anymore. I am planting it in the soil of my community and watching it grow. But the center was not the only new foundation I laid. I found something else I thought I had lost forever: companionship. I met Clara at the public library of all places. I had joined a book club because the silence in my hotel suite had become too loud. Clara is a retired history teacher with silver hair and a laugh that sounds like jazz music. She did not know I was wealthy. She did not know about the drama or the lawsuits. She just saw a man reading a biography of Frederick Douglass and asked if the seat next to him was taken. We started with coffee, then dinner, then long walks by the lake. For the first time in 45 years, I am not just a provider. I am not just a husband carrying the weight of the world. I am a partner. Clara challenges me. She argues with me about politics. She drags me to art galleries I used to think were a waste of time. Last month we went to Italy. I had never left the country except for the war. I spent my whole life working, saving, and worrying about the future. I never stopped to look at the present. Standing in the Colosseum holding Clara's hand, I realized how much of my life I had sacrificed for people who didn't care. I had starved my own soul to feed their greed, but not anymore. We drank wine in Tuscany. We got lost in Venice. We laughed until our sides hurt. I spent money freely, not recklessly, but with the joy of a man who knows he has earned every cent. I bought Clara a scarf, not because she asked for it, but because it matched her eyes. She didn't ask for the receipt. She just kissed my cheek and told me thank you. It was simple. It was real. It was everything Tiana and Bryce never understood. Speaking of Tiana, I see her sometimes. I do not intervene. I do not call. But a father always keeps watch. I parked my car across the street from the community hospital last Tuesday. It was raining a cold gray drizzle that reminded me of the funeral, but this time I was warm and dry. I watched the employee exit. At 6 o'clock sharp, the doors opened. Tiana walked out. She was wearing blue scrubs and comfortable white shoes. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore no makeup. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her shoulders slumped with the weight of a 12-hour shift. She walked to the bus stop and stood under the shelter waiting for the number 12. She didn't look like the woman who had demanded luxury. She didn't look like the wife of a wannabe real estate mogul. She looked like a woman who was earning her keep. I learned through JT that the divorce was final. Bryce is currently serving 5 to 10 years in state prison for fraud and elder abuse. He sends her letters, but she burns them. She is living in a small studio apartment near the hospital. She pays her own rent. She buys her own groceries. She is maintaining a 3.8 grade point average in her nursing program. Watching her stand there in the rain, I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't pity. It was pride. It was a quiet, fierce pride. She was struggling, yes. She was exhausted, yes. But she was standing on her own 2 feet. She had stripped away the entitlement and found the grit beneath it. The lesson had been harsh, brutal even, but it had saved her life. I didn't pull up to the curb. I didn't offer her a ride. I let her take the bus. Because that bus ride was part of her journey and I respected her too much to steal it from her. I put the car in gear and drove away. I drove toward the lake, toward the sunset that was painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold. I was behind the wheel of the Cadillac. I had retrieved it from the impound lot the day after Bryce's arrest. I had cleaned it, polished it, and purged the smell of his cheap cologne from the leather. It purred beneath me, a beast of steel and chrome that had survived the storm just like its owner. People say that when you get old you become useless. They say you should step aside, sit in a rocking chair, and let the next generation take over. They try to put you in a box before you are even dead. My family tried to bury me. They tried to write me off as a senile old man, a checkbook with a pulse. They were wrong. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. I am 74 years old. My joints ache when it rains and my hair is white as snow. But I have never felt more alive. Losing Beatrice was a pain that will never fully heal. It is a hole in the center of my universe. But that pain clarified everything. It burned away the fog. It showed me the cancer that was growing in my life, and it gave me the courage to cut it out. I lost a house, but I built a home. I lost a dependent, but I gained a daughter who is finally becoming a woman. I lost the illusion of family, but I found the reality of love. I looked at the empty passenger seat. I could almost see Beatrice sitting there, smiling, her Sunday hat tilted just so. She wouldn't want me to be sad. She wouldn't want me to be a victim. She would want me to drive. And that is exactly what I am doing. The road ahead is open. The tank is full. And for the first time in my life, I am not driving toward a job site or a bank or a family obligation. I am driving toward myself. My name is Winston. I am a mechanic. I am a builder. I am a survivor. And as the sun dips below the horizon and the city lights flicker on, I know one thing for sure. I am free. Do you agree with how I handled my family? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, respect is earned, not inherited. Throughout this journey, I learned that true love is not about shielding people from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is letting them fall so they can learn to stand on their own. I spent 40 years building foundations for a city, but the most important thing I ever constructed was my own self-respect. We often fear being alone as we age, tolerating disrespect just to keep family around. But I discovered that dignified solitude is infinitely better than company that drains your spirit. Life does not end at 73, it only ends when you stop fighting for your worth. If you believe that respect should never be compromised for the sake of keeping the peace, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and redemption.